I got all kinds of problems this morning. Just put my other computer on there. So sorry. Okay. Hi. All right. So in regards to Flexbox and Grid, they were two layout modules that were created specifically for layout, which is amazing. And there's a lot of similarities between Flex and Grid. And, we're going to focus on Flex this week. And then next week, we'll kind of get into Grid, and then we'll see how we can use them together. They both have their kind of, pros and cons of using. And you guys will find once you start to learn them that, there are similarities between both of them. The biggest difference is that Flexbox is a one-dimensional layout module, and Grid is a two-dimensional layout module. Now that probably isn't going to make complete sense right now, but it will hopefully come together once you guys understand them. The other thing is that Flexbox creates content first designs, and Grid creates layout first designs. So they each prioritize, a different aspect of HTML. And, like I said, you could use them independently, you could use them together. Ideally, I think it makes sense to probably just be using them together because they do complement each other in many ways, but you don't have to feel like you have to use them together, because you could solve many of the same sorts of problems using each one. But once you guys learn both, then I think you'll understand how one might be better in certain instances, although sometimes they do similar types of things. So let me just share my screen, and let's kind of get into doing some stuff today. By the way, how did it go with the card sorting, you guys? I never checked in with you this morning. Did you guys feel like that was a helpful exercise? Kind of, sort of. Nobody saying much.
I think it's definitely an important skill to learn if you're interested in the UX, UI arena.
It is. It's important, I think, just because it gives you an idea of how to really solidify and come up with your, navigation, and understanding from the user's perspective where they would expect to find certain things. So that can be helpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we'll talk about this a little bit later on today, but I think I mentioned to you guys on Monday that your next deliverable for 643 is to do a sitemap and a competitive analysis. And again, we'll talk about those in a little while. But they are going to be really the sitemap should be pretty easy, because now that you have your card sort done, you should know what all your pages are. You should know what they're going to be called. So it should be easy for you to kind of create a sitemap in that regard. All right, so what I'm going to do to start off with is I am just going to make a new folder for today. Today is the 10th, and I'll just call this Flex. I'm going to go into my root template, and I'm just going to grab everything from my root template. This was just like a little starting thing that we had done, and I'm just going to copy it into my 1110 folder. So I have some files to work with, and then I will open that inside of Atom. And so I just have a basic, HTML file set up. And I think I have just a CSS file. So it's just something to get us up and running with, and I'll open this page in the browser. Just tear that off. Okay. And all right, so we're just going to kind of like, just so we can talk about some of the concepts of Flex. We're not going to necessarily like build anything super beautiful right now. We're just going to learn kind of about Flex and about some of the terminology that goes around Flex and something like that. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to page title this, and we'll just call this, actually, let's just take the index page and do a save as, and we'll just save it in the pages folder because we might build a couple of pages that just kind of explain Flex. So I'm just going to call this one Flex 1. And because this is in the pages folder, I'm going to need to update the path to the CSS. So .. and then go into CSS and get to main. And then I'll just title this page Flex example 1. And oh, this is, yeah, that's my Flex page. Okay, perfect. And then from our index page, let's just give this a title of flexbox. And we'll just make this so we can get to our pages in case we want to look at them. So we'll just give it a H1 of flexbox. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to make a, let's just do an unordered list. So I'm going to do an unordered list. I'm using my Emmet UL greater than LI. I'll just make, I don't know, 3 list items for right now. I don't really know what they're going to be. And then we'll have them contain links. So I'm just going to write my little shortcut code like that. And that should give me an unordered list with 3 list items like so. And our first list item, the first link is going to link to that Flex 1 page. So I'm just going to say pages / flex1.html. And we'll just say Flex example 1. And that's going to pretty much be like, you know, we're just going to call the pages Flex example 2, Flex example 3. So I'm just going to paste this in, and then I'll just change these, even though these pages don't exist yet. We'll just kind of preemptively make these links so that they will link ultimately to these other pages that we might have. So if I refresh my page, I should just have an unordered list with some links to these various pages. Okay, so we're just quickly building a super basic navigation, nothing new here. All right, everybody good with this? So if you guys click your Flex example 1, you should go to the page that we just made, which obviously doesn't have anything on it yet. Are you guys with me?
Emily, yes. My Atom's taking a second to load up, so I haven't been able to create the index page yet. Is it possible to copy and paste that into the chat, or is that like too much?
You want me?
Or yeah, you could just do the body part maybe.
Okay.
Dang it. Thank you.
Oh, sure. And let me know when you guys are ready. Tell me when you guys are ready to go.
Emily?
Yeah.
The Flex 1, you changed the link, right? To go to CSS. That's the only thing you...
Yeah, that's the only thing I've done. And I gave it a title. That's all I did so far.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get something open over here to show you guys.
Yeah, I got a little lost. Did you do something to the CSS or just create a page?
I just have a blank CSS that I got from our like template file that we had made just to get up and running quickly. So in general, Flexbox is primarily used, I guess, for maybe like alignment, because it is the content first. And then grid is used for layout. And you guys probably remember, I think it was last week where I showed you how you could like, one technique anyways to center some content in the middle of an element. That's always been like really difficult. Vertically center, I mean, obviously it's easy to horizontally center. You can use text align center, but vertically centering something has always been a bit challenging. Luckily with Flexbox, it's super easy to do. So we will be looking at that as we proceed. And we'll kind of get into that as we go through it.
Could you go back to the index page for one more second, Emily?
Sure, yeah, no problem. So with Flexbox, it is a way that we can solve some things that have been, difficult. Like I just mentioned, the vertical centering is one. It is also a way that you can very quickly and easily have all of the children elements take up equal available space and not just horizontally, but also vertically. So that's always been a challenge. I think I showed you guys an example. Let's see, let me just find it really fast. Just move that out of the way, sorry. I think I showed you guys an example. I can find it, but you remember where we had those columns, and I think this might be it. But yeah, so you guys remember we were talking about, I believe it was Monday, but how we had these elements that would sit in the page, and these elements are sitting side by side because they're being floated. So we're creating these multiple columns with floats, which was never the intention of float. It, developers kind of figured out that this was a way that they could kind of create these multi-column layouts, but it was never the intention. One of the issues that we have with floats, like if I was, kind of laying out either of these layouts, however it might be, visually, if these were going to have backgrounds, like even though the content doesn't go all the way down to the bottom, it would probably look better for the, columns to all like optically be the same vertical length, at least with the background colors, and then the text could just end. So this has been super, super hard to achieve, like pre-flex and grid time. You'd have to kind of like do all this like hacky stuff. I mean, you could put like a height on these elements, but the issue is that if the content in here changes, then the height, kind of becomes useless, right? Like if I specified a height for all of these and told them all to be, whatever it is, let's just say 300 pixels tall, and then all of a sudden I put a bunch of text that's going to make them longer than 300 pixels, I'm going to create a whole new set of problems. So it was really, really difficult to create something like this. So luckily, now that we have technologies that were actually made for columns, that's something that we can very easily do. We can make all of these like children elements using Flex. Like if we set up something like this, we could make them all take up all of the vertical space, and they would, even though the content doesn't have to be the same. So that is really cool. And then the other thing that's been problematic in the past is that when we created something like this, like you guys can see, if I make my page smaller, like I get the horizontal scroll bars, right? And that's kind of a result of these items being a fixed width. So we could try to resolve that by like using percentages or something like that, that would allow them to scale, but it creates its own set of problems. So luckily with Flexbox, we have a lot of ways in which we can resolve that. So that's what we're going to be kind of working with to start off with. Everybody good so far? Okay.
Yes.
So we're going to jump into Flex 1, and I just gave it a title and updated my path to my CSS. We haven't obviously created any CSS yet. And let's just go ahead and let's create an H1, and this can just say flexbox. We'll just say example 1. And let's make a section element. And our section element is going to contain, let's just make it contain some articles. So I'm going to say article times, we'll just do 4. And then inside the article, we're going to go ahead and we're going to create an H2. And the H2 is going to just say, we'll just say item, we'll say article. And then I wanted to say like the H2 is going to say article 1, article 2, article 3, whatever it might be. So I'm going to, in order to do that with Emmet, I can't remember if I showed you guys this, but I'll just show you again. You use the $, and that will, populate the number with whatever it needs to be. So like if I just expand this right now, you can see it says article 1, article 2, article 3. So when we use the $, in Emmet, it allows us to create a numbering system, which is super cool, because a lot of times you do want stuff to just, say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever it is. You can easily create that using the $. So that's what we're going to do right here. So that's what my H2 is going to say. And then let's just do a plus, and let's make a paragraph with some lorem ipsum. So we'll just do P greater than lorem. And this little snippet of code right here should allow me to, create this block that I want, which it does. So I have a section, it has 4 articles. The articles all contain H2s and paragraphs, and that's pretty much it. Okay, so really, yeah.
How did you expand it?
You hit the tab key.
The tab, okay, thank you.
Yeah. So if we go back to this page and refresh, you guys should have a page that looks like this. Okay, everybody good?
Not yet.
Okay, tell me when you guys are ready. And, as you guys know, the default behavior of elements, block level elements anyways, in HTML is that they just stack on top of each other. And the reason that they're stacking on top of each other is because they are block level elements. They're going to take up all of the horizontal space. Even if we go in and specify some sort of width for these items, they will still just sit on top of each other. So even if we make enough room so they potentially could sit side by side, they will not sit side by side by default. Are you guys all with me?
Yes. Yep.
Cool. All right, so we're going to jump into our CSS, and we don't have anything in there. So let's go ahead and let's just make some CSS rules. We're going to start off by just, and we're just kind of going to do our, I think I talked about the reset, right? The reset.css. I don't have the reset.css file in here. And because like this is not, going to be like a full-blown super special website, I'm not going to worry so much about that. But I am going to just do like a quick reset, which is to use the universal selector. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to specify that my padding on everything is 0. My margin on everything is 0. And I'm going to do my box sizing border box. So that when I apply padding to elements, it doesn't, expand the overall width of the element. So I'm just universally applying this to everything. This is kind of like a little bit of a reset. I think I mentioned in the video that it's probably not the most optimal way to apply the reset, just because it can be a little intensive in regards to processing this, because it's really looking at every single element on the page with the universal selector. So, the Eric Meyer reset, which I introduced you guys to last time, it actually targets all of the elements, which is a little bit better use of resources, even though it is longer in the CSS. So, ultimately, if that's like a site that you're pushing out to development, that's probably a better way to approach it. But, just quick and dirty, like we can do something like this. It doesn't really matter. I mean, obviously we're not going to have any performance issues here because, you know, we're just viewing this website locally on our own computer. So it's not going to cause any major problems for us. But I just, you know, so we will occasionally use the universal selector just in these types of situations, but, you know, just want you to be aware of the potential, you know, kind of pros and cons of using that method. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to target my body, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to set my font family, and we'll just set the font family to, let's just use Tahoma. And if that's not available, we'll just request the default sans serif. And let's add, let's just add a little bit of margin. We'll add margin of, let's just say 2 M's. So we'll just have a little bit of spacing, which is good. And then what we're going to do is we are going to target our articles. And for our articles, let's go ahead and let's add, just so we can see kind of where they start, where they end. Let's just add we can just add a background color, I guess. And I'm going to open up my little color picker, and you guys can just, you know, whatever, pick some color. I'm just going to get like a very light color, you know, just so it's not too obtrusive on my page, but I do want to be able to kind of like see where these elements are. So I'm just going to use this like mint green color because that's what it suggested to me. So it should look like this whole block turns to the mint green just because I, you know, applied it to all of the articles. Currently, the articles have no separation, right? Because there's no margin, there's no padding. So the articles are just going to, you know, like kind of stack right on top of each other. So if I was to open my developer tools, and I'm just going to put these at the bottom of the page. So I'm using these 3 little dots. I'm going to click this little icon right here, dock to bottom. And if I was to target my articles, you can see like where each article is. So clearly, you know, they are 4 separate elements. Okay. So we could create separation like using margin, something like that, but we're not going to do that because I want to show you guys kind of what Flex does by itself. But let's add a little bit of padding. So we'll just add padding of 1 M all the way around, just so that the text isn't like slammed right against the edge. So all we've done is just added a little bit of spacing between the text and the edge of the article. All right, everybody good? Okay, cool. All right, so what we are going to do to kind of start off with is we're going to go ahead and we're just going to make this, I'll just leave this open, I'll just put it down here. We're going to make these, we're just going to start off by just using Flex so that we can see what happens. So how Flex works is you have a parent or a Flex container, and then it's going to affect or target all of the direct descendants. Okay, so if we look at this, if we make like section is the parent of these articles, they would, so this, if we made section a Flex container, that means that each article would be a Flex item or a Flex child. Okay, so those are the terms that we use: Flex parent or Flex container. Then we have Flex children or Flex items. Okay, so there's like a little Flex related vocabulary that I'm just going to be mentioning to you just as we go on. So if I make this section element a Flex container or Flex parent, the H2 is going to have no, you know, I mean, it's just going to follow along with its article, but it's not going to be affected by that at all. Only the direct descendants. So if I made the body a Flex container, then the H1 and the section would be the Flex items, okay? Because they are the direct descendants of body, right? So like if we were going to draw a little, you know, kind of like a little kind of like DOM overview, let me just open XD or something so I can just show you really quickly. It's important to understand like the hierarchy of your elements so that you clearly like kind of get what's gonna happen when you utilize Flex. So like, you know, I just opened a XD document just so I could quickly diagram this out. But if we wanted to like, you know, kind of create a DOM like kind of hierarchy, this is basically going to be body right here. Just make the font size a little bit bigger. Guys, okay, so here is my body element right here. And if we want to, you know, think about what the hierarchy is, actually, let's put this over here because I think it's going to be easier. So here's my body. And then it has two children. It has the section and it has the H1, right? Those are its children. And then the section element, it has 4 of its own little children, right? And they're all actually, they are all articles. So these are, you know, the children of the section, like so. And then the articles, they have their own like little, you know, kind of children too. So their children are H2s, and I'm just gonna write it right here, but we'll just say H2. And paragraphs. Okay, so these are like the children of all of these guys right here, right? Whatever. Anyways, you guys get it. So this is like the little kind of like DOM hierarchy, if you will, where the body is the parent of these two. It is the grandparent of these guys, and it's the great grandparent of these guys. So when we use Flex, whatever becomes the Flex container, only its children, its direct descendants are affected as Flex items. So if we put it on here, these 2 guys become the Flex items. If we put it on the section, these 4 become the Flex items. If I put it on article, the H2 and the paragraph. And you can like, you know, have multiple items be Flex container. Like they could be a Flex item and a Flex container. They don't have to be one or the other, because I technically could make the body a Flex container, which therefore would turn the H1 and the section tag into Flex items or Flex children. And then I could go into the section element and make it so it's already a Flex item. I could make it a Flex container as well. And then its descendants would become the Flex children. Okay. So just kind of keep that in mind as we talk about this, because it's going to become important to understand it. So what I am going to do to start off with is let's go back to the CSS. Gosh, I'm so sorry. Didn't realize my phone was on. Hold on just one second. One of my kids is calling me. Okay, so anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the CSS, and let's actually make a rule for section. And for the section, let's just add a border so we can keep an eye on where that is. So it's going to be solid, 1 pixel, and I'm just going to make it like dark gray, just so we can kind of see where the section is. And you can see it just encompasses all of the articles. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn this section into a Flex container. So we do that by using display. And then all we're going to do is write Flex. And if I just do this, just 1 line of code, watch what happens when I refresh my page. one line of code. That's all I did. Okay, so it turned all of these into the flex items just like that. Okay, sorry. So that's all we have to do. Yeah.
The height adjusts to the higher paragraph.
So yeah, let's turn the borders on the articles as well, just so we can see. So let's just do border solid 1 pixel, and I'll just pick just like make a darker like green color, whatever. Doesn't really matter what the color is, but I'm going to do that, and you can see where the kind of outline of these is. Now, roughly right now, all of our paragraphs are roughly the same height. For the most part, they're pretty much the same height. So everything's like nice and neat. It all fits together. Let's go into our HTML and let's just reduce down, doesn't matter, but pick one of the paragraphs and just reduce down the text. So I'm just going to maybe make the text just be really short. I can just, say that, whatever. If I refresh my page, you can see that the height remains the same on all of these, but something kind of happened with the width, right? Like before, they were more equally kind of spaced out roughly. Let me just undo for a second, just to get back, just to show you. So when we look at this, they kind of like roughly look like they're the same width, but really, if you look carefully, like this one is wider, right? For me, yours might be a little different. This one's a little bit more narrow. I mean, if we wanted to really figure it out, we could go into the developer tools, and like the first article is 184, second article 174, third one 196, and the fourth one is 176. So technically they're all different widths, okay? And we never, specified that. The way that they're getting their widths is based on the content. So what happens is when you make something a flex item, it's by default, when you don't do anything else, the width of that item is going to be determined by the content that it contains. So like if I reduce down the amount of text, you can see that vertically, this item is still going to be like, the height of all of the rest of the items. It's basically like the longest item is going to hold open the space for all of them. But the width is just going to, shrink down, and it's only going to be as big as it has to be based on its content that it contains. Okay. We're going to learn all sorts of ways that we can control this. So that will come. But before we get there, we just need to talk about a little bit more terminology. And this is something that you can't really see, but it's there. It's kind of the underlying premise of how Flex works. So we know that the section is the Flex container. We know that the articles are the Flex items. What we kind of don't see is that by default, every time you use Flex, all the Flex items are laid out, they sit side by side by default. They are basically following something called the main axes. Okay, so there's the main axis by default is horizontal. It runs from left to right. The main axes will follow the direction of your default language. So if you are viewing your web page and you use Flex and you're viewing your web page in some language where they, the default direction for the language is left to right, then the main axes would actually start over here and it would go to the left. Okay. So the main axes can change its direction. It's dependent on language, but for the most part, I'm just going to assume that we're all using, English or some, like whatever, Spanish, French, German, whatever, where we're going to be viewing it in a left to right manner. So that means our main axis is going to start on the left and go to the right. Okay. And you can change this direction. So it doesn't really matter what your language is. We'll learn how to do that. But this is the main axes right here. So let me just draw another little diagram just so you guys can have a visual. So just bring this back over here for a second. And I'm just going to make a copy of my artboard. And let's just get rid of all this stuff right here. So this is my flex container, okay? And my flex container is going to contain some flex items. Okay, so here's my flex items. Okay, and we'll just put a different color in those. Make it just be our light tealy green color, I guess. Okay, so here's the flex items right here, whatever. Now I have space between my items. Normally they're not going to have space. I'm just going to put space there so we can kind of see where they are. So what we have is we have this main axis, and the main axis, as I mentioned, is going from the left to the right. So let's just like increase the width of this a little bit. And I don't think I have a quick way to make an arrow, but just a little triangle here. Stick that on there. Okay, so this is the main axis. It goes from the left to the right. That's the direction of it by default. This line right here on the left edge of my container that is the main axis start. Okay, so this is the start of the main axis. Obviously, this over here is going to be the main axis end. Okay, so it's just the container is going to dictate where the main axis starts. The container is going to dictate where the main axis ends. Okay, and you guys will see that like these things are going to become important eventually. So this is the main axis. Then in addition to the main axis, we also have a cross axis. Okay, so the cross axis runs the opposite direction of the main axis. It doesn't, really, whatever, just make it blue or something like that. So the cross axis is just going to go in the opposite direction. So this is our cross axis, which means that this top part right here, so if I make a copy of this and just swing this guy around, let's just make this a different color, just be purple or something like that. This up here, right here, is my cross axis start. And conversely, this is going to be my cross axis end. Okay, so the top of the container indicates the cross axis start. The bottom of the container indicates the cross axis end. Okay, so these are just things that like exist inside a Flex container. You're not going to see them, but it's just important to understand this because when we use Flex, ultimately, we can change how these elements sit in the container by changing the axes. Okay, so I'll show you guys how to do that in a little while. Okay. All right, so this makes these items, the Flex, it makes the container, the Flex container, the section element, it makes the Flex items or the articles, the Flex items. All right, so what we can do is we can change the direction of how these elements sit inside the container. And we do that using something called the Flex direction property. So I'm going to come to my section tag and I'm going to use Flex -direction. Okay. And these are the 4 values that it can take: column, column reverse, row, row reverse. So which one do you think we're viewing right now?
Column?
Row.
Row. Okay, so this is row. So if I change this to row and we save this, we're going to see no change. That's the default behavior. If we change this to row -reverse and we save this, watch what happens. you guys see it reverses the order. So what I technically have done is when I did row reverse is now my main axis no longer runs from left to right. It runs from right to left. Okay, so I've swapped the direction of my main axes when I changed the flex direction to row reverse. And then if I change this to column, that is going to make these flex elements, the flex items, stack on top of each other. So this would be kind of how this would just display, like if I didn't have flex, right? Like if I just comment this out and we save our page and refresh, it looks exactly the same. This is kind of like the default behavior, right? They're just stacking. So you might be thinking that doesn't seem super useful. You guys will find that when you start to develop more with these technologies, sometimes you are going to want to change the direction, especially when we start to get into responsive design. So, anyways, especially when we get into responsive design. So that will become something that will become important to us. Okay. And then you guys can imagine what happens. Oh, and just to point out, when we change the flex direction to column, now where do you think the main axis is?
It's vertical.
Yeah, it goes from top to bottom. So whatever the flex direction is, that's dictating the main axis. So the main axis, and this I think is a little confusing to people because, you know, you assume, okay, yeah, here's the main axis, it's horizontal. Then here's the vertical axis, which, you know, that one's going vertical. That is our cross axes. But when we change flex direction, these guys change around. So when we change the flex direction to column, all of a sudden my main axis is from top to bottom. So the main axis follows the flex direction. And conversely, if we do column dash reverse and we save, you guys are, you know, are going to see that now the first item shows at the bottom, the last item shows at the top. What we've done is we've rotated our main axes. Now the main axis goes from bottom to top. Okay, so the flex direction controls the main axes, the direction of the main axes. When you have it set to row, it goes in the direction of your language. So in English, it's going to go from left to right. Okay, if I was, I think Japanese, right? You guys read from left to right, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so if I was making a website in Japanese and that was my default language, not just building it in Japanese, but that if that was the default language that my browser was set to, then my main axis by default, when I have it set to row, it would go from from right to left. Okay, so it goes in the opposite direction. I know this is a lot to take in, just, you know, we're just going to focus on English for right now. So just know that when we have it set to row, the main axis goes from left to right. When we have it set to row reverse, it swaps the direction of the main axis. Now it goes from right to left. When we have it set to column, it goes from top, the main axis is top to bottom. When we have it set to column reverse, the main axis is bottom to top. Okay, so that main axis can swing around depending on the flex direction. Does that kind of make sense a little bit? I know it can be a little confusing. Okay, so that is going to kind of, you know, dictate this. So let's just get rid of this, which means that if we don't have flex direction, the default value of flex direction is row. So it's just going to appear using row. Okay, so that is our default direction of the main axis, left to right, and the default behavior if we don't have it set. So, I mean, if you put it in there, flex direction, and you set it back to row, like it doesn't matter. I mean, nothing changes, you know, it's not really necessary. If you want to put it there, just so you remember, it's fine too. Okay. So so this is like a sub property of flex, right? If I don't have flex on there and we have something like this specified, it doesn't do anything. It just ignores it, right? The browser's like, okay, whatever, flex direction. I can't do anything on this item because there is no flex. So you can see like it still renders it, but it's not going to affect it. So like if we were to change this to, it's already appearing in column, it doesn't really matter, but it doesn't matter what the value is without flex, doesn't do anything. So, by itself, it won't do anything. When we add flex, that's when flex direction will kick in and allow us to do something with it. So just kind of keep that in mind. Okay, so refresh this for a second. Save. All right, so I have my items sitting side by side. Let's go back into our HTML and let's go ahead and let's set up a couple more items inside of section. So currently I have 4. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to make a couple of more. I'm just going to copy like, whatever these last 2 articles. And so I'm going to end up with a total of 6, and I'm just going to change, just so we can keep track of which one's which. I'm going to change the H2 to say article 5, article 6. Maybe I'll just shove some more lorem ipsum in here, whatever it is. And I'll save my page. And if we refresh, you can see what happens. So it just keeps making these columns, and it's going to make these as thin as they possibly can be. You guys don't have to do this because it's just going to be too much. But if I just duplicate all of these and put them on here and I refresh, do you see what actually happened now? It, gave me horizontal scrolling. Okay. So it's just going to keep putting these articles side by side, as many articles as can possibly be. They don't wrap. And we never gave it any sort of instructions to wrap, but look what happens if I have this many articles and I go to my section and I give it a width. Let's say we give it a width of 500 pixels or something like that. If I define a width, you can see like this is, do you guys see like that's the 500 pixels right there? That's where my section is basically cutting off, it's ending. But these guys are going to spill outside of the section. If I add some padding, you'll be able to see it better. So you can see clearly where the section element is. These just spill outside of it. They're going to continue to just stack side by side by side by side as long as they possibly can. If we don't define a width on the container, then the container will just expand and be as big as it needs to be. But because the section, the container, if it does have a width, they don't really care. They're just going to continue to be in their row and or column setting as needed. They will spill out of the parent container. Okay, I'm going to just get rid of those extra 6 articles. So I'll go back. So I just have 6. Okay, they are spilling out a little bit right there. You can see like this last one's kind of starting to spill out a little bit. We're going to go into our CSS and we're going to define a width on section. So let's go ahead and let's give section, which is the container, and let's give it a width, and we'll just give it a width of 60%. So instead of using a fixed width, we're using a flexible width, a percent-based width, but still, unless your page, is super big, like if your page is kind of narrow, like mine is right here, you can see like that's where my section element's ending, right? So my last couple of articles are spilling outside of the section because my page is somewhat narrow. If my page is wide enough, then the section element, like at this point, the section element can be 60%, and these can all sit side by side. Because remember, the width of these is dictated by their content. So when I make this page more narrow, they have to be like at least wide enough so that the H2 can sit on one line. Like it can't break this word into multiple lines. It's not like it's going to hyphenate it. It does break the numbers onto their own lines, but that's because we had a space in there. But that basically is what's dictating how wide these have to be, along with like the text. Like this, this article 5 in my case is probably a little bit wider. because it looks like this word, whatever, I can't even say it, but it's wider than the word article. So that's probably holding this one open to be a little wider. And if we like hovered over, we could see that one's 123. Well, this one's 124. It must have a wide word too somewhere in there, but they're all slightly different. You know, this one's 129, whatever it might be, 117. Their widths are going to be determined by the content. So some of these words just are longer. They're holding this open wider than even the article text. Okay. But they will be as wide as they can be. When I have more real estate, obviously they give a little bit more width to each of these items. The flex items are going to take up more width. So they will take up as much width as they can. If I didn't have that width of 60%, you can see like now they take up a lot more width, right? Based on the content though. Okay. Anybody have any questions? Okay. All right. So what we can do is we can control how the flex items sit inside of the container when we use the flex property called flex wrap. So the flex wrap property allows the flex items to wrap onto the next line when the screen size is too small to contain all of the items. So if we go again to the section element, and if we use a flex dash wrap property and we set the flex wrap to wrap, and we refresh, you can see that now they're wrapping, and now it's kind of wonky, right? It actually looks like it's just one column. I mean, it is one column. It wrapped all of these onto the next line. All of the children are going to appear on their own line. Okay. And the reason why is because we never specified any sort of width on these. So they're just going to take like up whatever width they can. If we go into our articles and if we define a width on our articles, so I'm going to give them a width of, let's just say 50%. And we refresh, you can see that now they sit side by side. So now there is, because they're taking up 50% or half of the available space, now we get like a 2-column layout. So if you wanted a 3-column layout, all we have to do is change the width to like 33, and we could just even write 0.333 or whatever. But now it should be able to contain 3, right? If you wanted a 4-column layout, you would change the width to 25%, right? Okay, so does that make sense? Like when we have flex wrap, if I get rid of the flex wrap, I'm just gonna, you can see how even though we specified that they have a width of 33%, kind of ignores that, right? Because I mean, it tries to, but 33 times 6 is exceeding 100% anyways. So they have to spill out of the parent. They're going to, do whatever they need to do. It just like, if the math doesn't work, then it just kind of doesn't work. And if we change the width on the articles to something like a fixed width, like let's just make them each 200 pixels, so obviously we would need 1200 pixels to display all of these. So you can see right now, because I have flex wrap on, they each take up 200 pixels. Now my container is percent based. So that means as I resize my window, the container is going to grow and shrink. And so if the container is, like right now it's showing only 1 column. I mean, essentially I've kind of created like a responsive website. Like here I am, 1 column. This is how much space I have. As soon as the container is wide enough to support, if it's wider than 400 pixels, then I get 2 columns, right? And then as I start to increase the size, when my container gets to be 600 pixels, I'll have 3 columns. When it gets to be 800 pixels, I'll get 4 columns, etc. Until, it's wide enough to support all, I probably don't have enough space, but because I made this 60%, but if it gets wide enough and they can all sit together, then I'll have 6 columns. So it's going to just kind of reflow and fit in there however it possibly can. So you can start to see how you can start to kind of, add some controls on the children And then if you have the parent as being a flex item, and then depending on what you're putting here, you can kind of start to create these. And you'll notice that it doesn't matter how much content I have, the column height is going to match, right? And the column height is dictated by the tallest column that sits side by side. So like this Article 1 is taller than Article 2. It dictates like the row height of this first row. The second row, the height is dictated by Article 4 because clearly it has more content than Article 3, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. We could try to lock down the height by adding a height, but you know, that in itself could, like if I add a height property to my articles, I'm just going to do it in here so I can get rid of it. And let's just say we make it 100 pixels. You guys can see what happens, right? Like now, you know, it's going to cut off some of the content because the content can't all fit in this. And then it's going to, on the very bottom, when it kind of spills out, they're actually all kind of spilling out, but they're just the ones that come later are in front of the other ones. So, you know, this is something we would normally never do. We don't want to put height on stuff because it can be problematic, right? In this sort of scenario when it's going to contain text or something like that. So normally we wouldn't do that. Okay. Do you guys have any questions so far? Okay. So, so we force these to do wrap. The default value is something called no wrap. Which just does what they normally do. They're just gonna, you know, if I didn't have this, they would behave in the same way. That's the default behavior. So we have values of no wrap, we have values of wrap, and then we have a value called wrap reverse. And I think you guys can imagine what's gonna happen, but if we do wrap reverse, then what happens is it reverses the way that they fill. And so notice how it's like, you know, it doesn't put 1 over here on the right, it puts 1 on the left, because again, right now, our flex direction is set to row, which means the main axis is left to right. So the first article goes to the bottom and it's on the left, and then it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. That makes sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay, cool. I know it's kind of like a lot of stuff to take in. All right, and then we have something called flex flow, which is basically shorthand of combining flex direction and flex wrap. So instead of writing flex direction and flex wrap, I could have just written flex flow, and then with flex flow, you're just going to combine these. So I would just say row space, and then I would put wrap reverse. Like this. And that's going to do the exact same thing. Like if I refresh, doesn't change. If I change it to just wrap, so if I have row wrap, then it goes back to where 1 is up here. It is essentially overwriting these two. You can see how they're crossed off, and that's because flex flow is doing the same thing. Okay, so this is just shorthand.
And for flex flow is always direction first and then wrap.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it just combines, but you always write the direction and then the wrap. Okay, so anybody have any questions so far? Okay, so let's go ahead and let's go back to flex1.html, and we're going to do a save as. And we're going to save this as flex2. And I'm going to get rid of everything here. Let's get rid of our section. And I'm going to change my title to just say flex example 2. My H1 can say flex example 2. And we're going to do something a little bit different on this page. So let's And actually, let me think for a second. Okay, I know what I'm gonna do. All right, so for this one, we're gonna have a main, and our main is gonna contain some divs. Let's just make like 4 divs. And the divs are just gonna have some text in them, and they will just say item $. So item 1, item 2, item 3, etc. And oh shoot, you know what? I put the multiplication in the wrong place. It should be like that after the item. I don't have anything else there. So if you do that, you should end up with a main and then 4 little baby divs. Everybody good?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Tell me when you're ready.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, and so you guys can hit the back button and go back to your home page and just click your Flex Example 2 to get onto your 2 page. I haven't saved mine yet, so it looks just like Flex 1, but if I save it, it should end up looking like this. Can you close the door? Do you know how to do that? Gotta wait. All right, so what we're gonna do here, and let's we'll link out to our CSS, that's fine, but let's make an embedded style here, just because we might want to use some divs again and treat them a little differently. So we're just going to use embedded styles. And what we're going to do is we're going to target our divs. And we're going to give the divs a width of 150 pixels, a height of 150 pixels. And we are going to give them a border. And you guys can just pick some color or whatever. So you should end up with something that looks like this. Let me know when you're there. Everybody good? Okay. So these items, even though there's plenty of space to the right, they sit side by side. The reason that they're sitting side by side is because they're block level elements. Block level elements just stack on top of each other by default. It doesn't matter if there's enough space. You can see where when I hover over, it kind of almost looks like there's margin, you know, that's just the open space. We didn't define margin, but you know, that's where that space is. Let's make a rule on main. And let's just give main a border as well, just so we can check in and see where it is. So just pick a different color for your border on your main, wherever you want that to be.
Border is missing an R.
Oh, Thanks. So helpful to have so many eyes on your stuff. All right, so you guys can see that the main is just going to be as big as it possibly can be. It's being restricted by the margin that we put on the body from our external CSS, you know, a little bit pushed over from the right and the left, but other than that, it's as big as it possibly can be based on the width of the browser. So even though there's plenty of space, it doesn't, you know, the items, the flex item, well, they're not flex items yet, but the divs are not using that space. So if we want these items to sit side by side, we can go into main and we can say display, and we're going to say flex. And now if we refresh, you can see how all of the little boxes, the divs, are going to sit side by side, which is what we just looked at. Okay, so it's going to create these. In this case, all of the divs are the exact same width, and that's because we specified a fixed width of 150 pixels. If my page gets smaller and can't accommodate all of these, look what happens. Okay, so instead of giving me horizontal scroll bars like you might expect, it actually shrinks the flex items down. Okay, so this is a default behavior of flex, is that when you make the when you make a flex container, even though we specified a fixed width on our items, it doesn't always respect that fixed width. It's going to try to. If my page is bigger, then they don't get bigger than that fixed width. They stay that fixed width, but they will shrink down and get smaller if they have to. So if my container, like right now, if I look at the container, which is main, you can see that main is 472. So, you know, the width of 472 does not support 600 pixels, which would be the overall width of my 4 divs. Since I have 4 times 150, 600. So they now shrink down. So each of them are equal, you know, they're 117. And you can see when I hover over, I get this like little crosshatch type of thing. And it shows me in the diagram, you can see there's like a little arrow, what the intended width is, but it's indicating that the width has now shrunk. So that is going to be a default behavior of making something a flex container. If you have width assigned to the flex items, they, you know, don't always respect the width. They could shrink down if they have to. Okay. All right. Now, if my page is larger than the 600 pixels, then you can see that the flex items are just going to appear starting at the main axis start and moving in the direction of the main axis end. So they just follow the direction of the main axis. Now, this is controlled by something called justify content. So if we go to main and if we add a property of justify content, and we have quite a few values that we can plug in. So flex start, we'll start there. Flex start is what it does by default. So if I refresh, nothing happens. Flex start means that it's just going to align the items, you know, at the far left, that's where they're going to be placed. If we change this to flex end and we save, now you can see that the items move to the end. You know, they're basically aligning to the main axes. It doesn't change the order of the items like we looked at in the last exercise. It just changes how they sit in regards to their horizontal spacing inside of the flex container. Okay, so now they're aligning to the end. So we also have, so we have flex start, flex end. Those are pretty self-explanatory. We have center. So if I change it to center, you'll notice how they stay perfectly centered in the middle of their parent. Okay, so this one's obviously super useful. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't take the text and center align the text. It just takes all the flex items as a group and aligns them to whatever the value is. Okay, so flex start, flex end, and center. And I think they're trying to just make it end, start, end. So most browsers are going to just support end. It was originally flex end, flex start. But then you guys will learn grid uses something very similar. So now they're trying to change the spec so it's not like flex start, grid start, or whatever. They're just trying to make it start and whatever. So either way, it's fine. You can use flex start, flex end. You may want to check. I can't remember when they adopted that. Let's just look really quick. Can I use? Okay, so this is, yeah, the layout start and end. So they have pretty good support on the modern browsers. I mean, obviously you're going to run into problems with IE. That's going to probably be true in most situations, but most of the modern browsers, you know, you may run into a little bit like this was just released for Samsung in 2021. It doesn't support it. So, you know, there are some, and let's just see if we change it to Flex. Let's see if those same browsers still have problems. I don't know if it'll let me search for that. Look like it does. Let's just do justify content. Okay, so yeah, if it's flex end, I'm guessing that this Samsung internet browser would support it. It has a little bit more support. You know, I don't know if that's really a deal breaker. I mean, obviously you have to do your research and figure out like who your users are, and if that's gonna, you know, if you have a lot of Samsung users, or if you're worried about it, then just use the flex dash end. But it is coming, you know, in the next few years, like all the browsers are going to support start end. You don't have to put flex start, flex end. Anyways, so we have flex start, flex end, center. We also have some other cool ones, which allow us to control the space in between the items. So the first one is space between. And if we do space between, you can see how the first and the last item go all the way to the edge of the container. And then it's just going to automatically, you know, decide what should be the space in between the items. And as I resize my page, that space in between the items is going to grow and or shrink. So it's just dependent on how much available space is there. We have space around. And these are all kind of similar, but they have subtle nuances. So space around, it gives you half space at the beginning and the end, and then it just distributes whatever space is left over to the in-between elements. So space between pushes the beginning and the ending item to the far edges of the container, distributes the space in between. Space around gives you half space at the beginning and the end, and then distributes the space in between. And then finally, we have something called space evenly. And space evenly is going to evenly distribute the space between all of the items. So the spacing between the items is equal. It doesn't matter, you know, where it is, it's just going to equally make the space. So super cool that we are able to, you know, kind of horizontally align all of these items, you know, together in these different ways and control the spacing between the items. Everybody good so far? Okay, let's go into main. And let's give main, I'm going to give it a height. Okay, so normally I was talking how we probably don't do this, but in order to show you guys this, we have to have some height. So I'm just going to add height of 600 pixels. This is a fixed height. So now you can see that the flex container is much larger. Let's just make it 500 because then I don't have to scroll at all. But the flex container is going to be is going to be much larger than the, you know, height that's needed for the flex items. Okay, so they all get stuck to the top. So very similar to the justify content, we have something called align items. So justify content, just to back up, this is aligning items along the main axes, right? So really quickly, before we get into the align items, here I have these spaced out, everything's fine, but watch what happens if I change my flex direction. So if I change my flex direction to column, which means that I'm changing the main axes. Do you see what happens? Now, I had made this have a height of 500. You can see how it's shrinking the items, right? So my space evenly doesn't do anything because it doesn't have enough space to distribute, because my container, you know, is a fixed height. But basically what happened is I just took the main axes. So if this was, for instance, instead of space evenly, if I had this back to flex and oh, it's not good. We're not going to see that either. Actually, we wouldn't see that. So let's make our height like, you know, 1,000 pixels or whatever. Now you'll see the space evenly is kicking in. Okay, but so instead of, you know, it's not like it's gonna always align horizontally. I shouldn't have said that before, because it really is dependent on where the direction of the main axis is. Justify content is going to align along the main axis. So whatever the main axis is, that's how justify content works. So sometimes it can, you know, I would say more than likely it's going to align items horizontally. But if you change the flex direction to column or column reverse, then it's going to create the spacing in between the items vertically, because it follows the main axes. Does that make sense or cause confusion?
A little bit, because the main axis is always horizontal, right? The other
No,
one is called cross axis.
The main axis, remember, it follows the flex direction. So when the flex direction is set to row, which is the default behavior, so if we don't specify flex direction, it is set to row. If it's set to row, then the main axis goes from left to right. If it's set to row reverse, the main axis goes from right to left. If it's set to column, main axis goes from top to bottom. If it's set to column reverse, main axis goes from bottom to top. So the main axis changes depending on the flex direction. The flex direction controls the direction of the main axis.
The cross axis is not here yet.
Yeah, we're not talking about cross axes yet, but we're going to in just a second. Okay, so the cross axis is always opposite of the main axis, right? I mean, not opposite, but perpendicular to the main axis. So if the main axis is going from left to right and it's horizontal, the cross axis is always vertical. If the main axis is vertical, as it is right now, then my cross axis is horizontal.
So what if the flex direction didn't described in there, and we usually follow the main axis is just horizontal, right?
Say again, Julie, sorry.
Yes. What if it didn't describe about the flex direction, is a column or just other? Yes.
If I didn't have this specified,
Yes.
then the main axis goes from left to right, because
Right.
the default value of flex direction, if you don't define flex direction, is row.
Okay.
Yeah. And when you guys view the videos that I made you this week, I have a ton of videos on all this stuff. I have, like, you know, I explain each of these things in detail, and I have little diagrams and stuff like that. So it will sink in. I mean, obviously it takes a while to understand it, because I mean, it is confusing since it changes, you know, it's like, it's not always the same, which can be a little weird. Like if I just told you, okay, the main axis is always going from left to right and it's horizontal, like, you know, you would get it right away. But because it has the ability to change based on the flex direction, that can be a little confusing, I realize, but you know, it has its benefits too, which once you understand flex, I think it will become a little bit more clear. Okay, so anybody have any questions so far? Okay. All right. So the justify content will align along the main axes. I'm going to just set my flex direction back to row, which of course is the default behavior. So now justify content is going to horizontally align the flex items. Okay. However, we have them specified. So what we're going to talk about next is something called align items. So this property aligns items along the cross axes. So it basically works exactly like justify content, but instead of aligning along the main axes, the align items aligns on the cross axes. So if I add align items, and if so, they have the same values, you know, that we just looked at: flex start or start, flex end or end, center. Those three anyways, they have some other ones too. But if we say align items and we say, let's just say center. You can see that I'm going to set the height of my container back to 500 instead of 1,000. But you can see what happens is that my flex items are now going to appear vertically in the middle of the page. They're basically being aligned along the cross axes. So if I use flex start, they would be at the top. If I use flex end, they would be at the bottom. If we use center, they go in the center. Okay. And then align items has two other values. There's no like, you know, space evenly, space around, space between. They don't have those values. But they do have a couple of other values, which we're going to talk about. Okay. So is everybody good with me so far? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the height, or just comment it out on the div. So the height of these items is going to shrink to be whatever the height needs to be, okay, when align items is set to center. If I don't have align items specified, do you guys see what happens to my items? They take up the entire height of the parent, okay? So, you know, before they were staying like in a nice little square because I defined both width and height, but by default, flex items stretch and they take up the entire height, which is what makes them, you know, unlike like the float example where, you know, like if I wanted the columns to all look like they were the same height, this would, as I was explaining before, be very difficult to do with floats, but with flex, it just happens by default. Okay. And that's because align items is its default value is something called stretch. So stretch is what it's doing right now. If I put stretch, it doesn't do anything different than what we had before. But if I change it to anything other than stretch, so if I go back to flex start, now you can see that the items are just going to be as tall as they need to be to contain their content. So the height of the items, if we don't specify height, is dictated by whatever content is inside of the items. So if we had more text in one of these items, it would be taller. So for instance, if I go back into my items, so here's item, let's just go to item 2. And if I just add, I'm going to say P greater than lorem 8, just to add like, you know, an 8-word paragraph, you can see how item 2 now takes up more height. Okay, because it has to. All right. If we use flex end, then the items get pushed to the bottom of the cross axes. Okay, so they're going to appear at the bottom of the container in this example because our cross axis is going from top to bottom. So this is the cross axis start. This is the cross axis end. So hopefully now you're starting to see why I went through the trouble of diagramming out like where the where the main axis start and the main axis end was, and where the cross axes start and the cross axes end was by default. Okay. So remember this is the main axes right here in this little example. What we're showing, this is indicating main axes. And it goes, in this case, if it's going from left to right, this is the main axis start. This is the main axis end. So when we use justify content and we say flex start, it aligns to the start of the main axis. When we use flex end, it aligns to the end of the main axis. In regards to the cross axes, so the blue line is the cross axes, right? The cross axis has the same thing. It's going in its direction. Whatever direction the cross axes start is the flex start or the cross axis start. So when we do flex start, all of these items would go to the top and then end is down here. Okay, so that's how they get distributed. Okay, so that's why flex end brings them to the bottom like this of the cross axes. So we have flex start, flex end, center, and then we have stretch, and then we have one other value. And in order to show you this value, we have to kind of change some of the text a little bit. So I want you guys to go into item 1, and let's make item 1 an H1. So I'm just going to make an H1 and put my text inside of an H1. Item 2 can just be how it is. Let's say for item 3, let's make this an H6. And for item 4, let's just put an inline style. So I'm just going to say style equals, and then in quotes, I'm going to put font size. And let's just make the font size like 60 pixels. We'll make it super big. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm changing the size of the font, right? And you can obviously see what the size of the font is. Maybe this is a little too big. Let me make it 50. Okay. So everything has different sizes based on, whatever. It's a H1, it's a paragraph, it's an H3. It just has some sort of inline style on it. Okay. And you can see that all of these items are aligning to the bottom of the browser screen. If I was to draw a little line at the bottom of the text, the baseline of the text, you can see how the baseline of the text is different, right? So if I move the bottom of this and I put this right underneath item 1, you can see how like we don't really see some of the text in 2 and 3. If I move the baseline down to the bottom of item 2, it's pushed down away from, item 1. It looks like item 2 and item 3 maybe have similar baselines. And then this one, the baseline's like up here. So they're all a little bit different. So with align items, we have something called baseline, which is why I went to the trouble of explaining this. So if we do baseline and we align these items, you can see how, like, when you first look, it's kind of like these items look like they're all weird, right? They're all like, there's no real alignment. But if you were to draw a line, oh, I can't bring that up. Just open another browser window real quick. If you were to draw a line right underneath the text, do you see how the baseline lines up on all of so the first line of all of the items, the baseline of all the items now lines up perfectly. Doesn't matter what size the text is, line height, whatever, doesn't matter how much text is, but they all align up perfectly together. Normally, they don't do that. Like if I set this back to just, you know, flex start and we refresh the page and there's my little ruler that I'm using right here. But if I grab my ruler and put it at the baseline, you can see how the baseline, you know, it doesn't matter, right? Like they're just going to the start. The item is aligning to the top, but the baselines have no bearing whatsoever. They just do what they're going to do. And if we did the same thing, even with center, we brought our ruler back. You can see how, you know, there's no rhyme or reason. I mean, the items are centered. It's based on their height. It was as if I, you know, vertically centered these in the parent is what I'm doing. And then even stretch, right? They just stretch the entire page. But again, if we were to look at their baselines, they have no, you know, relationship to the baseline of each other. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so those are the values that we can use on align items.
Emily,
Yeah,
actually, I'm not clear. Can I ask you one more questions?
sure.
So align item axis is absolute value, or it also just depend on the direction?
The align items is always aligning along the direction of the cross axes.
Okay.
Oh, what's going on? I should say not two, but along cross axes. Start, flex, and center, stretch, which is the default, and baseline. Okay, so are you guys all with me?
Just need 1 second to
Okay,
copy that
yeah.
down.
No problem. Tell me when you guys are ready.
Emily?
Yeah.
What if I would like all the items aligned in the center and one on top of the other and spaced evenly? If I would have to change the flex direction to column and then align items to center. So there I would have one item
Yes.
and the other in the center. Right?
Yeah, and yeah, that would do it.
Okay, okay, got it. Thank
I mean,
you.
we could build something out like that if you want. You guys want to give it a try?
Sorry?
Okay, so let's save this page out as flex 3. So just because I don't want it to get too complicated in one file. So I'm just going to take flex 2 and we'll save it as flex 3. And I'll just change the title to flex 3. We'll change the H1 to flex 3. Let's get rid of all the main And let's get rid of our, we'll leave the style tag there, but we'll get rid of all the styles. So we'll just kind of start from scratch. So this is going to be my third page right here. And let's go ahead and let's make, for this one, we'll make main again. And then inside main, let's make some divs. So we'll do divs and let's have the divs contain let's do 4 divs again. And then we'll have these contain H3s. And the H3 are gonna say, we'll say item $. And then we'll put a little bit of text in there. So we'll say plus P greater than lorm, let's just say 6. So we'll just make kind of shorter sentences.
Emily, does the capitalization of item or when you put article inside of the curly brackets, does that make a difference, the capitalization of the first letter?
What's in the curly braces is the rendered text.
So okay, got it.
It actually generates the text that's going to show up.
That makes sense.
Okay. So you guys should end up with something that looks kind of like that. Everybody good?
One sec.
Okay.
Okay, now I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's go in and let's make, we'll target main to start off with, and we're going to give main a, let's just give it a border. And you guys can just whatever, pick any color. I'm just going to go with whatever the color thing suggests for me today. And let's give it a height. And we'll just say height of 500 pixels. And we're going to say display flex. And then let's target our divs. And for our divs, we're just going to apply a border. Not as excited about this color choice. But... Okay. So if you refresh your page, you're going to see that the items are going to take up the entire height of the parent. That's because align items by default is stretch. So they're stretching. Okay. And what we wanted to do is, and I'm sorry, Paulina, you were saying you wanted them to be vertically stacked.
Column and align item center. I wonder if that would make one on top of the other and in the middle.
Okay, so let's change to flex direction column, which is basically changing our main axes. So now the main axis runs, instead of from left to right, it runs from top to bottom. Okay, so if we use, remember, align items is going to now align things along the cross axes. So our cross axes is horizontal at this point. So if we use align items, and I think you said you wanted to put center, and we do center, you can see how it's going to align them, you know, to the horizontal center instead of the vertical center, because it's always following the cross axes. Got it?
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Sure. No problem. All right. Anybody else have any questions right now? Okay, So it is 10. Let's just take our break. You guys can let this sink in a little bit. When we come back, we'll continue to work with flexbox and learn some of the other property values, and then we'll kind of build something a little bit more, practical in scope. So I will see you guys in 30 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna pause my recording.
So the
yeah.
main the CSS code.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. All right, so let's go ahead and I'm on Flex 3, and all I did was just make the height 300 on the container, just to make it a little bit less. And what we are going to do is we're going to go ahead and let's just make another main. And this one is going to have, we'll make it have like, let's just say 10 divs. So I'm going to make divs, and I'm going to have them just say, they'll just have a number on them. So we'll just put some number sign in the curly braces, and then we'll do times 10. Okay, so simple, easy. We're just going to make a bunch of divs, and they just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Like so. So if we refresh, we should just see another container, and then inside it we have our little divs. And actually, let's see. Let's make this, instead of main, let's make this a div, and we'll just give it a class of container, just so we can target this a little differently. Sorry about that. Okay. So I have a div with a class container, and it has little baby divs. So it will look like this. And what we are going to do is we're going to come up to our embedded CSS, and let's go ahead and let's make a rule for div.container. And we will make some CSS. So let's give this a border. We'll make it solid, 2 pixels, pick some color that you want your border to be. That's fine, I'll just use this limey green. Great. And I'm going to give it a margin top of just 2 M's, just to push it away from the other one. So it'll look a little bit different. There we go. And this obviously is just default behavior. So what we will do is let's go ahead and let's now, I'm just going to move this rule up here. Let's make rules for the little divs inside of containers. So let's do a dot container div. So this will just target the divs that are in the container, and let's give them some padding. We'll just say 10 pixels, just so they have a little bit of padding around them, like so. And let's give these elements.
Emily, could you explain one thing for me real quick?
Sure.
What the difference between div dot container and dot container space div, how that
Yeah, sure. So
applies.
this one is the div with a name of container. When there's no space, it is the name, like it's either the class or the ID name of that item. When we put a space, that means that these divs are descendants of container.
Okay,
Okay.
sounds good.
Yeah.
And in that same example, could I have just put the first one, div that container, no div? Yeah.
Yeah, we could just write it like that.
Okay.
Either way, same thing. Yeah. This would just, if I had something else on my page with a class of container, like let's say I had an article with a class of container, then this would affect it. If it just said div, then it has to be a div with a class of container. So
What was the shorthand for creating the items? in the, oh, div container. Oh, so you just did div.
I
times
used
10.
main, so it should actually be div dot container, like that would have gotten us this.
Okay, so div $sign times 10. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, and let's give these items, let's give them a height and a width. So these are going to kind of be small, but we'll say width of 50 pixels and we'll give them a height of 50 pixels. So they'll just be like little squares. And as you can see, they'll just shrink to be little squares like they are. All right, so what I would like to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to have the container be a flex container. So we're going to add display of flex. And of course, that's going to make all of these sit side by side, just like we would expect. And then on the container, we're going to give it a height. So let's just add a height, and the height doesn't have to be that big. It can just be 300 pixels, just so they have some room to kind of like exist. And what we're going to do on these is we're going to use the align content property. Now, I know this is confusing because there's an align items. There's now an align content. So align content will align the items along the cross axes, but it's different from align items in that it treats them all as a group. So let's actually, just so you guys can compare this, let's duplicate this whole container. Like, you know, we'll just have it appear twice. Okay, so I have the exact same thing appearing twice on my page. Okay, and we're going to give the first one, in addition to the container class, we're going to give it a class of AI for align items, and the second one can have a class of AC for align content. Okay, so they're just going to have multiple classes. Of course, that by itself doesn't do anything. Page just looks like this. Everybody with me?
Not yet.
One sec, getting it all down.
Okay, tell me when you're ready to move on.
Did you add any CSS for the second div, or is it just, you have just added the?
All I did was
the
add the
div.
div. Yeah, I don't have any
Okay.
CSS yet.
All set.
Okay, everybody good? All right, so what we are going to do now that we have these flex elements, we're going to target the align item container. So this is just going to be .ai, right? And we're just going to tell it to have a align items, and we'll just make it center. Okay, so as you can imagine, it's going to line these items along the cross axes, and it's going to center them within the middle of the parent element. Yes, yes?
No, sorry. Why just AI and not container AI?
I mean, because it's just another name. So
Yeah.
like, you know how you have your first name and your last name, I could refer to you as Paulina, or I could refer to you as Segovia. I'm not sure if I'm saying your name right, but how do you say it?
Segovia. But any of the okay, got it.
Okay, so it's just two class names. I mean, we could, you know, we could write it like this, dot container and then no space dot AI, because they're both of the names together. If it has space, it wouldn't work because now it's looking for a child. But if it was like this, but it also isn't necessary, we can just write dot AI.
Okay.
Got it?
Yeah.
So it's
And
just, we're targeting the container here. And now we're targeting the same container, except we're only targeting the one with a class of AI.
Mhm. And when you have ID, you have to use the whole name that you gave to that ID.
No, if it was an ID, it would just be like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you name your ID with two names, you have to
You can't give two ID names like you can with classes. So you could give this item ID of AI and a class of container, but you couldn't give it two IDs of container and AI.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
only classes, you can add multiple ones.
And so IDs can't have multiple words either. It has to be a single, no spaced.
Correct. Yeah,
word.
I mean,
Okay.
multiple words is basically two classes.
Okay.
Right? So it's not like multiple words like you know, I mean, if this was like container AI, like if I wanted it to like be more descriptive, I'd have to put a dash or an underscore or use camel casing or one of our other methods. But when we have a space, it just means that these are both names that we're referring to this div with.
Okay. I guess I just have one more clarification. If it was an ID, it would have to be either container or AI, or it would have to have a dash in between to make it all one. Okay. All right. Cool.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes. Yep.
Emily?
Yeah.
In the same context, so every single time when we have more than two words that represent the name of that class, we can use either way.
It's like assigning two class values or, you know, two class names to that attribute. So
Okay.
I could refer to this container as container or AI.
All
The
right.
reason I'm adding an additional class is because I want to target both of these separately, but I also want them to share the container like rules that we made.
Okay.
So both
Gotcha.
of these are inheriting like the, you know, the border that I put and the height and, you know, whatever else we define display flex. But now I can grab this one and say, hey, I want you to do this. And then we're going to grab this one and say, now I want you to do this. So technically I could, you know, I could have a line item center on the AI one, and then I could go to my .ac and we
Yeah.
could use align items again.
Yeah.
And we could say flex end, you know what I mean? Or some other value. So now you can see how they're both being interpreted differently. There's no way I could do this, you know, if I just had the container, because it would have to be one or the other. But now
Perfect.
I'm adding
Very
all of
clear.
these rules plus this rule to the first container, and then all of these rules plus this rule to the second container.
Gotcha. Thank you
Okay.
very much, Emily. It is clear. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, sure, no problem. Okay, so and let's make our page a little bit more narrow. Or actually, let's do this. Let's go to our container. We already added, or let's go to our divs. Okay, so we added a width and a height. Let's make the width a little bit more. Like, let's change the width to be 150. So we're gonna just make these wider. And depending on the size of your browser window, once you make 150, you know, you probably won't see them at 150 unless your browser window is super wide. Okay, so you can see like when mine's really wide, they go to 150, but anything, you know, less than whatever, 1050, I guess, they're going to display less than 150. Okay, so we looked at that before. If I want these to go onto multiple lines, I'm going to go to my container and we're going to say, if I want them to display on multiple lines, what do I need to do? What property would I add?
Is it flex direction?
So flex direction just controls the direction of the main axes. If we want them to go onto multiple lines or wrap onto multiple lines, we would use flex wrap, right? So if I make the flex wrap, now when I refresh, you can see how now it looks a little different, right? So here, when I use flex wrap and I have a width, you know, my container is obviously not large enough to support all 10. Now, instead of squishing down to be whatever width they need to fit on one row, now they go to 2 rows. And you can see when we have align items center or even flex end, do you see how it like treats them, you know, with like kind of it's aligning them to the center, but do you see how they kind of like don't move like all together, right? I mean, like they're not like one grouped unit. it kind of like, distributes these in the center. And for this one, like it's putting spacing, if we look in our one of these guys right here. So here's our divs, like it's putting this spacing between the, like we never put margin on these flex items, like, but you can see how like it's adding this additional space, right? Okay, so if let's just change these both to flex and so they're going to do the same thing. So the bottom row goes to the bottom and then it kind of distributes the next row, like wherever it needs to. So if my page got small where I needed 3 rows, you can see how it kind of is like spacing these up, but they're like vertically, they're like equally spaced. It just, when we put flex end, it makes sure that whatever's the last row aligns to the bottom of the container. Okay, but you can see how like this one doesn't like slam right against it. So if we change the AC to align content and we save and we refresh, do you see the difference? How now it treats this whole, all these flex items as like a group. And so when we use our flex value properties on the flex content, I mean, they're the exact same. They're the exact same with the exception, I think there's no space evenly, but you can put flex end, flex start, center, space between, space around. So like if you change these values both to center, like center worked really good on align items before when we had just one kind of row of items, but you can see like now if we look at our align item container, kind of does something a little funky, right? In the middle right here, like it, they're centered, but there's like this big gap in between. Whereas when we use align content, it's doing the same thing. It's aligning the items on the cross axes, but it treats these as one grouped unit. So it aligns them all together. So like if my page was wide enough to support one row, these look identical. We don't see any difference between align items and align content. But when I add in the flex wrap and I have multiple rows, you can see there's a difference. So align content does the same thing as align items. It's aligning the items along the cross axes, but it treats them as one group. So if we use align content and there's only one row, we're not going to see any difference. But if we use align content and there's multiple rows, then we get a different sort of treatment. Or, I mean, it could be columns. It's just is the cross axes. So like I'm saying row because the cross axes is vertical, but if we switched our flex direction, then the cross axes would be horizontal. Okay, so like if I just go to my container and I say flex direction and we make it column and we refresh, do you see the difference now? So like I'm still using the exact same align items or align content, but now the cross axes is no longer vertical, it's horizontal because we changed the flex direction. So you see how it spreads them out. So if you want something like multiple rows and or columns, depending on your flex direction, basically, to be centered along the cross axes as a group, you use align content. If you want to center them as just, pretty much like align items, I think it's best if there's only one row or column, depending on flex direction. But if you have multiple rows or columns and you want to be able to center those items as a unit, as a group, then you use align content. Little weird, but it is what it is. So, okay, are you guys with me so far? Okay, so everything we've looked at so far are all flex container properties. They are, properties that we put on the flex container. So when we work with flex, we have the flex container properties. We also have flex item properties. So let's go ahead and let's make a new, let's just make a new fresh page to work on. So I'm going to go ahead and just take my, my Flex 3, and I'm just going to do file save as. I'll save this as Flex 4. And I'm just going to, you know, at the top, I'll change the title to be Flex 4. And I'll change my H1 to say example 4. And then maybe I'll just put in parentheses flex item properties. And let's get rid of main. And let's get rid of, we can leave our container. Let's just get rid of this AI. And you can get rid of the second container altogether. So we just have one div with a class of container, and let's just put like three divs inside it. Okay. And I don't need these anymore. And I'm gonna get rid of, I guess we'll leave it there right now. Okay. And okay, I don't need this main. Let's get rid of that. Just clean everything up a little bit. So this is my Flex 4 page. So it just looks like this. Okay, everybody with me? All right, so what we are gonna look at right now is we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna look at the ability, and actually let's get rid of our height on the div containers, and we can leave the width there, I guess that's fine. So we'll get rid of the height. So then the height is just going to be, you know, whatever the size of the container is, right? Because it's stretch by default, right? So this is what these look like. You know, we did a display flex. They have the exact same amount of content. We requested that they have a width of 150. If we look at the width of each of these elements, each of the items is going to have a width of 150 because there's plenty of space for them to have a 150 width. If our page got really small, we have flex wrap on, so they're still going to keep their default widths, and they're just going to wrap to, you know, multiple rows if they have to. Yeah. Okay. And let's get rid of our flex wrap just for now. Okay, so now if I resize my page, you can see if my page gets more narrow.
No. Okay.
If our page gets more narrow, then like they start to shrink. Okay, without going into the developer tools, I can't really make my page more narrow than this. It's as narrow as it lets me do it, but they're like each of the divs are now 144. They're not 150. So they've shrunk a tiny little bit. If I went into the developer tools, and well, our page isn't responsive, so don't even worry about that right now. Okay, so anyways, they do shrink. Like, let's just make the width, we'll make the width 200. So then we can clearly see that they are shrinking. So here my page is narrow. These are each taking up equal space, 144. If my page gets wider, they will grow to be as wide as 200 pixels wide. And, you know, and we requested 200, so they will be 200 because there's no flex wrap. If I make my page more narrow, then they shrink down, you know, if they have to, based on the size of the container. Yes? Okay, default behavior. So pretty much everything is at the default behavior. We haven't done anything super special. So we're talking about some of the flex item properties right now. We're going to specifically be talking about flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. Okay, so when we use flex grow, it's going to allow you to specify how, like determine how much each item is allowed to grow as part of the whole. So we're going to use our nth child selectors so we can target these like little, kind of divs uniquely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let's use a div nth child, and we're just going to use 2. Oops. Okay, so div nth child 2. And so this one's going to target which of these guys?
The third one?
Oh, sorry, I have to do dot container because I'm using divs all the way around, right? Let's be more specific. Okay, so dot container, because that's just filling the parent, basically. Okay. So if I do nth child 2, it gets this middle one right here. Okay, so the second one, you can see that it's there. Okay, and we can let me just make this maybe something not quite as bright, just so we can see it. Okay. So there is our second item, okay? And right now, all of the items are 200 pixels wide, okay? So if we look in here, I have enough room, they're gonna be 200 pixels. If my page shrinks down and becomes, the container gets less than 600, then technically they can shrink, they can become thinner than 200 pixels. They're just going to take up equal space, but all 3 divs right now are taking up, in this particular view, 165 pixels. Okay, so they're all taking up equal space. Okay, so I'm just going to make this big again. So now they're back to 200. So if I change, targeting the second one, and if I target my flex grow, okay, and if we make the flex grow, let's just say 3, and we refresh the page, do you guys see what happens? Even though we said, hey, have a width of 200, that gets kind of thrown out the window. It doesn't really matter. We now said flex grow 3. So what happens is, as I resize my page, look at the second one. The first and the third one, they stay at 200 pixels wide, but the middle one, okay, is going to grow and be as big as it possibly can be. It's going to basically be, it's going to be 3, even more than 3 times, but it's just going to take up more space. We're saying how much can it grow based on these other ones. Now, when we start to shrink the page down, it still shrinks. Like now they're all equal again. Okay, because all we did was say flex grow, but when they start to get bigger, we're saying, hey, this one's going to now grow at, it's going to take up this additional positive space. Like if I change this to 2, the flex grow of 2, it looks exactly the same. It doesn't change at all because none of the other items have flex grow on them. So now it's just saying, hey, I'm allowed to expand and get bigger. If the flex grow is set to 1, that is the default none of them have flex grow. So it actually even looks the same even at flex 1. Okay. So, but because we have flex grow, we're saying, hey, you're allowed to grow more than anybody else. Like nobody else has any kind of grow, instructions. You are now allowed to grow. So if we go ahead and let's target the first one. So I'm just going to use my nth child again. And this time we'll say 1. And if we do a flex grow of 1, okay, so now both of these guys have flex grow of 1, you're going to see that they take up equal space. Like if we look up here, this one is 317.5. This one's 317.5, right? This one's still 200. So as my page gets bigger, they're both allowed to grow. They're going to expand at equal durations because they both have the exact same flex grow value. Basically, this is like a switch saying, hey, you guys are allowed to grow. Okay. The third one is not allowed to grow. So it's just going to stay at its 200, or if the page gets narrow, everybody can shrink because we said you guys cannot, we don't have anything controlling whether they shrink or not. But they are, these 2, 1 and 2 are allowed to grow, and they're going to take up as much space. Now, if I go to the second one and I change it to 2, now we're going to see a difference. Okay. So now when I refresh, do you see how the second one is slightly larger than the first one? Okay, and as I increase the page, this one grows bigger than the original one for sure. This second one though grows twice at twice as much of a rate. So it's going to grow twice as fast as the other first one that has grow on. So again, if we target, I'm just going to copy this again, and I'm going to put this in here. Oops. And we'll just target the third one now. Okay, and we'll leave it at flex 1. You can see it kind of looks the same as what happened. Like now they all grow. Like these don't stay at their 200 pixels. They're allowed to grow, but the middle one is the one that's going to grow the most. Okay, and it's not like it's twice as big. So if we look at the size, like this is 431, this one's 663, this one's 431. Okay, so it's not like twice as big when you like the math, but it has the ability to grow and take up more space. If we change this to flex grow 3 and we refresh, you can see that now the third one takes up the most space. This one takes up the least amount of space. And as my page gets bigger, they all grow at some ratio, but the first one grows the least, the second one grows a little bit more, the third one grows the most because it has a higher flex grow value assigned to it. Okay, so it lets you determine how much the item is allowed to grow in relationship to the whole kind of unit, like how much of that extra free space does the item get? Because originally we say, hey, made these 200 pixels, but as soon as we say flex grow, then this basically is like not really important anymore. Like if I go in here and I target one of these divs and we just get rid of the width of 200, like, you know, you can see that the ratios change. Like now it's a little bit more equal because now it has no basis to start from. But now if we took this one, we could put 2 of the widths of the 1 and 2, and we could put 3 of the widths of 1 and 3. Like now you can actually see the flex grow. When we had the width on there, kind of like convolutes it a little bit, which is just how it works. But if we took these off now, you can see how, you know, by default, if they didn't have any flex grow and we got rid of the width altogether, they just take up as much space as they possibly can, right? I mean, as they need, not as they can. So here's all this open space up here. This is the container space, like they don't need that space. But if we add a flex grow, doesn't matter how much, if I add one of them just to flex grow, now it takes up all the rest of the available space. So these only need this much space, enough space to display their numbers. This one now takes up all of the rest of the space. If I go back to div 2 and we turn on the flex grow 2, it gets twice as much of the available space as div 1. And then finally, when we go back to 3 and we turn on flex grow 3, it gets 3 times as much of the available extra space as 2 and 3. Okay, when we had the 200 pixels, that was kind of coming into consideration too. So the numbers get kind of convoluted a little bit. I just wanted to kind of show you. So really, we don't really need this width anymore because now we're using flex grow, which is allowing these to grow and be, you know, as big as they can, taking up all the space in the container, but it's like a ratio. So this gets, you know, 1 part of the whole, this gets 2 parts of the whole, this gets 3 parts of the whole space that's there. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so that is flex grow on the, yeah.
What other values can you give to flex grow? For example, percentages can work or
It's just always a numeric value like this. You don't assign like a pixel or anything. It's just more like a ratio. So like if I made this one 10, right, and we refresh, you can see how now that gets 10 times as much space as these other ones. Like as long as it can. I mean, if I try to make it some crazy number like 100 and we refresh, I mean, these still have, like, this isn't 100 times as much because these still have to take up, you know, some amount of space based on their content. but you can see how the second one's like a little bit bigger than the first one. You can't really probably fit two of the first ones. It has a width of 39. The second one only has a width of 48. So it's not like I can put two of the first ones in there. And then this last one just takes up whatever available space is there.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so do you guys have any questions about that at all? Okay, so flex grow just controls how much positive extra space in the container the items would take up. So technically, it's a great way that you can build a responsive page, right? Like if I got rid of the flex grow on the first one and rid of the flex grow on the second one, and we just went back to putting the width at 200 pixels, okay, you can see how like this could be an aside, this could be my main content, this could be my aside. And as my page grows and shrinks, that main content is going to take up, you know, as much of the space as it can until the page gets narrow, right? And then everything's going to shrink down together. But because we're saying, hey, you're allowed to grow, it can take up more space. If it didn't have that flex grow on there, then they all just take up their 200 pixels. So it kind of overrides the width because it's saying now, let this percentage stuff get kicked in. Okay. Okay, so let's get rid of the width again. And oops. So let's get rid of the width. And okay, so let's now talk about the flex shrink. Okay, so flex shrink is going to allow the item to shrink if necessary, and it sets the size. So if we, let me see the best way. Oops, sorry, being the wrong shortcut key. If we put this back, so these guys all have flex grows, and actually, let me see. Okay, so let me, for this, let me just comment this out together and put this back, because I don't want to confuse you with the flex grow and the flex shrink. So we'll just set this back to just like, these are 200 pixels. They all take up the same space. When the page shrinks, they are going to shrink so that they can fit in the container. Okay. But they're all shrinking at the equal rate. Okay, so they're shrinking at the same rate. So what we're going to do is, I'm just going to use this background color on the middle one again, and we'll just make a, let's just copy this. Okay, so I'm going to target my middle or the second div, and we'll give it the background color blue. And this time we're just going to say flex shrink, and I'm going to give it a flex shrink of 2. Okay, so if we save the page, here's the page. My page is plenty wide. They can all be 200 pixels wide. Okay. But when my page starts to get smaller, you're going to see that now they're not shrinking at an equal rate. The middle one is shrinking faster than the rest of the rest of the elements. So when you use flex shrink, it just allows the item to shrink if necessary. Okay, and it will shrink more than the others. So if we again target like the third one and we change it to flex shrink. Okay, so now the third one has a flex shrink of 3. The second one has a flex shrink of 2. You're going to see that the third one gets a little bit smaller than the second one, and then the original one. So if we look, div 1 is 172, div 2 is 144, and div 3 is 116. As I make my page smaller, and this is as small as I can make my page, but as I make my page smaller, they shrink, but this one has the ability to shrink faster than the other ones because we added the flex shrink. Okay. So we can use these together. I'm just going to delete these flex shrink rules and uncomment this out. I just wanted to show you without the flex grow, but if we go back and we add flex, you know, they can have both. So if we add flex shrink, and so we'll just make the flex shrink on this one 2, or let's just make it 1. Okay, and then on this one, we'll say flex shrink. And we'll add the flex shrink of 2. Okay, so this one, the third one grows 3 times faster, but now we're also telling it to shrink. And let's get rid of our 200 for a second, because now we have flex grow. So these are going to grow. So here is my page. Okay, so I have flex grow. Now, this is a little weird because we have flex shrink and flex grow, and they're kind of fighting with each other a little bit. So because there is available space still, it's, I mean, the flex shrink, I guess I can't really show you this with both of these on here. I have to get rid of those. But if we do something like this, so here's my page, and well, these both have flex shrink. Let me add this one, have a flex shrink of 1. Yeah, this, I have to have some kind of width to show you the flex shrink, because it's like otherwise they're only going to be as big as they have to. But if we put a width on them, you can see like we have a flex grow of 1 currently on the first one, so it always is going to get bigger. These guys stay at their 200 pixels, but when my page starts to get smaller, you know, the first one obviously is shrinking, it's shrinking, and then when my page gets really narrow, these two are shrinking 1 and 2 at the same rate. This one shrinks a little bit faster because it has a higher flex shrink value. Okay, so it just kind of works opposite a little bit. Anybody have any questions? Okay, so that's flex shrink and flex grow. And then we have something called flex basis, which defines the size of the element before the remaining space is distributed. So for instance, I'm just going to get rid of the flex shrink and flex grow on all of these items. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to give we're going to assign a flex basis, and then we'll look in a minute how we can use these together. But I'm going to give the first div a flex basis of 10%. Okay, so if we refresh our page, this flex basis is now overriding the width. Okay, so the second and the third one still have their width of 200 pixels. They're taking up the 200 pixels. The first one is just taking up 10% of the space that is available. So our container right now is 647. This is taking up 64. So roughly 10% of the space that is available. If I resize my page and make my page bigger, my container now is 1087. So we can assume that this would take up about 108, which it is. So it's taking up 10% of the available space. These guys have their fixed widths of 200. Flex basis kind of overrides the fixed width and is going to apply it. So if I give this middle one a flex basis, and let's say we make the flex basis on this one 70%. Now it's going to take up, 70% of the available space. So this is taking up 10, this is taking up 70, and this is a fixed width of 200. So if we look, here's our container, it's 1087. This one is 108. This one is 7 times 108. So whatever that is, 758. And then this one is still taking up 200, right? Because it's a fixed width still. So it just takes up its fixed width. If we resize the page, the third one always stays fixed width, but these other two get bigger or smaller depending on the space that is available. And when my page starts to get really small, you can see how 1 is only taking up 10% of the available space. 2 is trying to take up 70%. It's not quite 70% because this one has a fixed width of 200. So the number gets a little bit convoluted, like our container is 484. So let's just say 500. So 70% should be something like 350. You know, it's, I'll just make it a little bit bigger so it's closer to 500. So whatever the container is now, okay, like whatever, roughly 500. We'll just say, let's just round up 504. So this one is not taking up 300, it's close, but like this one is kind of like, you know, it had 200, so we have to, like, it kind of sees it a little bit of as a ratio. But if we put a flex basis on this one as well, and we just say flex basis is going to be 20%, right? So these all equal up to 100. Now this one's going to take up 70, this takes up 20, this takes up 10. And then as we resize the page, you know, it's just like as if we assign percent bases to these elements. It defines the size of the element before any remaining space gets distributed among the container. And if it's less than 100, then, you know, there's just going to be extra space in the container like this, right? So now I change the middle one to take up 40. This is 10, 40. So that's 50, 60, 70. They're taking up 70% of the available space that's there. You guys all right?
And if we use the flex basis, we don't use the flex shrink and grow, right? It doesn't make sense.
Well, you can. So you might want to control how they grow and shrink when you use flex basis. Just because you're using flex basis doesn't mean that you don't use the grow and shrink. You might want to use all three of them together, because you might want to specifically control how those things kind of, you know, work together. So like if we have, let's make our, okay, so our items are 200 pixels and our container is, let's make our container, let's make the container have a width of, we'll just say 600 pixels. Okay, and let's make each of these items take up 100. Okay, and I'm just going to get rid of my flex basis for right now. Okay, so each of the items is taking up 100 pixels. The container is taking up 600 pixels. Okay, so if I shrink this down, now I have horizontal scrolling because I put a fixed width value on my container. So my container is never going to get less than 600 pixels because we are using an absolute value on this element, and it is the flex parent, so it doesn't shrink down. Okay, so basically we have 300 extra pixels of space. Now, if we want these items to grow and we want to distribute that space among those other items, that's where we have the flex basis, the flex grow, and the flex shrink. It's going to allow us to assign values to those items. So if we have, let's say, okay, so instead of this container nth child, let's just go back to container. Let's apply the same values to all of them. So instead of targeting them uniquely, now I'm just going to target them all together. So if I want to apply flex basis, flex grow, and flex shrink, we can use the flex shorthand. And I know this is a little confusing because we have display flex, but we also have a flex property. The flex property allows us to consolidate the flex basis, grow, and shrink into one rule. We don't have to write it like that, but you know, a lot of times we do have it written like this is the most common way that you're going to write it, where you're going to use the shorthand method so that we're essentially going to assign them all at the same time. So if I write something like this, okay, so if I put 0, 1, and auto, Okay, so I'm passing in 3 values. The first value is the flex grow. Okay, so when I set the flex grow to 0, it means these items are not going to grow larger than the flex basis size. Okay, the flex basis size is currently set to auto, which means just make it be whatever it needs to be. Like if I save my page now and we look at these, okay, so we already set the width to 100, which now auto is inheriting 100. So these are going to be 100. If we resize the page, they don't ever grow. If we shrink the page down, shoot, let me make this, let's make this be, let's make this 200 and 800 over here, just so I can show you guys. I don't think it's actually, well, okay, so let's change this to just be, let's make it 80% because it'll have to be flexible so I can show you this. Okay, so here is the container, it's 80%. If this shrinks down, the page shrinks down, you can see what's happening is that these items are getting smaller than 200 pixels, okay? That's because we have flex shrink on all of them set to 1. They're all equally shrinking at the same rate. Their flex basis is now set to auto, which it's inheriting this width. If we get rid of the width, you're going to see that the width of these is only as big as it needs to be based on the content. So that's like the default behavior. And if we resize this up, we told them not to grow. We're not going to really see them shrinking because, you know, they're so tiny at this point. We don't have very much content. So that's why I needed to put like some sort of width on there. But right now, if we go back to having the width of 200, they are going to try to be 200 pixels. But as my container gets smaller, now they can't be 200 pixels. And we said, you guys can all shrink. So they're going to shrink. But when my screen gets big, they're not allowed to grow. If we change this to 1 auto, okay, so now they're allowed to grow, they're allowed to shrink, and the flex basis is just going to default to what we set on the width. So now they'll be as big as they possibly can be, and they'll get as small as they possibly can be. Like they're going to grow and shrink, you know, and just do what they need to do. They're all doing it at the exact same rate. If we set, instead of auto here, if we set this to a value, so it could be a percentage, it could be, you know, we could overwrite what we have. So like if I set it to 20%, now if we refresh, they will, well, see, it's a little weird when you have the width and the flex basis because they kind of are working, and we have flex grow and shrink. Like we won't really see, like this doesn't really matter, the 20%, because we have flex grow on there. Let's make flex grow 0 again. So they're not allowed to grow. And now they're taking up, you know, 163, 20% of the available space. So this flex basis is overriding our initial width that we specified. They can never get bigger than 200 pixels. That's, no, sorry, they will because it's 20%. So they'll continue to grow and be 20% of the width of their container. When we make the container smaller, they're all going to shrink down equally because we have the flex shrink set. So in essence, when we set flex basis, it kind of overrides the width. You know, at this point, if I got rid of the width altogether and we refresh the page, we don't see any difference. It doesn't matter what the content is, how much content is there. Flex basis is forcing these to be 20% of the parent amount. Okay, so it's going to take probably a little while for you guys to grasp how this works, but understand that when you define flex grow, you're allowing the item to take up whatever extra space is available in the container. Flex shrink is allowing you to tell how much, like kind of proportionately how you want the items to shrink. And flex basis is where you're setting the, it's kind of like width in a lot of ways, but sometimes like right now, it's setting the width to be 20%. If I have my width of 200 pixels on there, it's still going to be the same. It's overriding the width in this case. So it's kind of like another way of assigning a width. Normally you wouldn't use a fixed value on the flex basis. Like if I set this to 100 pixels, it works, but you normally wouldn't do it like this because, you know, I can grow. We said flex grow was 0, so they're not going to grow. And here, I guess I need to make this maybe 200 so we can see that they will shrink. Okay, so now they're 200 pixels each. When I shrink this down, they will get smaller if they have to based on the size of the container. So it's just like another way of being able to define the size in addition to defining how much they can grow, how much they can shrink. Okay. Are you guys kind of with me or not? So, you know, if I wanted one of my items, like let's get rid of the flex here, the flex shorthand, and let's just uncomment this out. So they all have a width of 200 pixels if they can, right? So now if the container is big enough, they'll be 200 pixels. If it's narrow, they won't be 200 pixels. But if it's wide enough, they'll be 200 pixels. If I come down to one of these, I'm just going to go to my middle one, which is the one with the background color, and I set my flex shorthand to, I'm going to set it to 2 for the grow, 1 for the shrink, and then we're just going to set the basis to 200 pixels like so. If we resize, you can see that this one is now bigger than 200 pixels. Like the flex basis, because we have grow on here, doesn't really matter. And because we have shrink on here, we're just saying, hey, you can grow now and be twice as much. The flex basis is like, it's 200 pixels, but really that number doesn't matter. I mean, we could really put anything in here. I could put 10 pixels. And because I have flex grow and flex shrink, like we're not really going to see any difference because the flex grow and the flex shrink kind of in this example anyways, are kind of overriding the flex basis because if this is the only item that is allowed to grow and shrink. If we set flex basis and other items are allowed to grow and shrink, then, you know, we could see some change there. So like if I took child 3, and if we just assigned a flex grow factor of, let's just say 3. Okay, so you can see like this one's now going to be larger, right? And as I shrink this down, now you can see that the middle one gets, it's allowed to shrink, right? More than these other ones. So it's going to shrink it down. And the flex, I mean, it's never going to get like smaller. Let's change this number to maybe 100. Okay, so when we change it to 100, it gets a little bit wider. But because we're still saying, hey, you can shrink if you need to. But like if we get big, because we're telling it can also grow, it's going to grow. So, I mean, you know, this value, like you could see that it was more narrow when we set it to 10 as opposed to 100. Like this is the base size that we want it to be, but these flex grow and flex shrink typically could override it if they have to. Okay. So it's a little bit like working kind of with ratios on your flex items. Are you guys with me? Do you have questions?
Just to sink in. So when you're using the shorthand, it's grow, shrink, basis.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
And you guys probably aren't going to like this very much, but when you when you use the flex shorthand, you don't have to use all three values like we have here. You really can just put one value in there. So if I set my flex to 3 and I save this and we refresh and we resize the page, you can see like the third item is growing. This, when we only have one value, it is the flex grow. So, you know, I would say for now, write these all out, but if you just put one value, it's the same as putting flex. So this basically is the same as me writing flex for my flex shorthand, 3 for grow, 1 for shrink, and my flex basis is just going to be 0, you know, which, I mean, it can't be 0 because of the content, but if I wrote this out, flex 3, 1, 0, that's the same, because the default values for flex, like when we don't have flex assigned. So for instance, we didn't put flex on this first one right here. And so if we look at our first one, it's 200 pixels. As it gets bigger, it's going to be 200 pixels, right? So it's not allowed to grow. But when my page gets more narrow, and at this point, because these other ones, well, it's still going to be 200 pixels. I don't think I can make my page small enough. It does have a flex shrink on it though. We just don't see the shrink happening. So like default values of flex, like if you don't define the flex grow, flex shrink, flex basis, the default values are 0 for grow, 1 for shrink, and then the flex basis is just auto. It just is whatever it automatically would need to be. So those are like the default values of flex. Okay. It'll probably take a little while just to shrink, to shrink in, to sink in. And just using it is gonna, you know, I know it kind of can be a little bit confusing with this, but I'm just introducing it to you guys. You'll become more familiar the more you use it, but it does take a little while just to kind of get a hang of it. Cause I mean, I admit it's like confusing, you know, to use by default. Okay, but just know, like, I'll just put a note down here. Flex shorthand by default is 0 for grow, 1 for shrink, and auto for basis. And you know, before we started messing around with the flex like properties, when we looked at some of these other ones, like if I go back to example 3, if we didn't, you know, as I made, well, these have flex wrap, I don't know. Okay, maybe our first one, but as I make my page, I think we have fixed width, so it's not going to work in the same way, but by default, you know, items don't grow. By default, items do shrink. I mean, we saw that actually happening. And then the flex basis is set to auto if no width is defined, right? They're only as wide as they have to be for the content. So just kind of thinking that that's what is going to happen is how they work. Okay. Do you guys have questions? Okay, so if you only put in one parameter, it's flex grow. The other parameters, shrink and basis, are optional. Those are the optional parameters that we could potentially use. Everybody okay? All right, so we can do some, kind of like sophisticated layouts using Flex. So let's do this. Let's save this page. Let's put this to more of like a practical example. We are going to, let's just, I'm going to do a save as. I'm going to save this as Flex 5. And I'll just title this Flex 5. Let's get rid of all of this. So I'm getting rid of everything inside my style tag. We'll say Flex 5. And we'll just okay. All right. Everybody with me so far? Okay, so a super simple layout for a website is where we would have a header that takes up the full width. We would have a footer that takes up the full width, and we might want like 2 or 3 columns in the main section. Maybe we'll just start off with 2 columns where we have a main element that takes up the majority of the width, and then we have some sort of like sidebar that takes up less width. Okay, so we're going to build this using Flex. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a, let's just create a, we'll just make a div and we'll give it a class of container. If you're using Emmet and you write something like this, div.container, and you expand out, it adds the class for you. Okay, so div.container is going to make a container like so. And what we are going to do is inside this container is we're going to make a header, and let's just have it say header, and then the header is going to be followed by a main, and then we'll just have it say main. We'll just label everything, and then that's going to be followed by an aside, and we'll have this say aside, and that's going to be followed by a footer, and we'll have it say footer. So we're just kind of, building super basic web page. Okay. So here's my page. Very exciting, I know. Okay, is everybody with me? All right, so what we're going to do is we're just going to make our rules in our embedded styles. Let's go ahead and let's make a rule for dot container. And then I want to get everything. So I'm going to do dot container greater than asterisk. So that's going to get all of the children of the container. So you know that the asterisk is the universal selector. It just grabs everything by itself. When we combine it, like this, it's just saying, okay, grab all the descendants. So, that hopefully makes sense. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to set our background color. And you guys can just pick some sort of background color, whatever color you want. I'm just going to grab something kind of light. And then I'm going to add some padding of 2 M's, and let's add a border, and we'll just make our border solid 4 pixels, and we'll just make it a CCC, which is gray. Okay. So here are my elements. There they are. They just stack on top of each other as you would expect. Everybody with me? Tell me when you guys are there.
Emily, can you explain the dot container greater than sign asterisk real quick?
Yep.
Again,
It's just-
sorry.
So we're targeting the container. And then when we say greater than asterisk, it just means grab everything that is a descendant of container. Doesn't have to be direct
Okay.
descendant, it would just be anything inside of container essentially. So just like
So-
the asterisk is everything, this is
Okay.
everything, but it's has to be within container.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, and then we're gonna make a rule for dot container. And we're gonna tell it to display as flex. Okay, so that's gonna make these sit side by side, and the width is just whatever it needs to be based on the content. I mean, we just have a little bit of text, so the width is what it is. And what we are going to do is let's turn on flex. We can do that in a minute. Okay, so let's target the header and the footer. We're just going to use a group selector because we kind of want them to do the same thing. And for the header and the footer, we want them to take up the entire width, right? So we want them to grow, and we want them to take up the entire width, all of the width that they can. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to define a flex of grow of 1, shrink of 1, flex basis of 100%. Okay, now if we save now and we refresh, you can see how they take up more space, you know, than the other items, right? They're going to fill in and take up the whatever available space is there. Let's just turn a border on our container so we can kind of see where the border of the container is. So we'll just add a thin little border. I'll just make it gray. Okay, so you can see where is just open. Why did that just change? Border.
Display flex.
Oh, thank you. Like, what's going on? Okay, there we go. So now we see the border of the container, and obviously the header and the footer are growing at the same rate. They shrink at, you know, like the same rate. So they're just going to get smaller. And because we said, you know, there's 4 of these, there eventually they could spill out because we have some padding on them and, you know, whatever else we went ahead and put on them. So you can see like we have 2 M's of padding that's holding them open to being at least this size. What we're going to do is we're going to use on the container, we already have display flex. We're going to use a flex wrap. We're just going to set this to wrap. And so now you can see that it kind of starts to look a little bit more like a website, right? Like where we have the header taking up all of the space, the footer taking up all of the space. As we resize our page, the header and the footer are just going to be as big as they possibly can. We're saying we assign their flex basis to be 100%. We're saying, hey, grow as much as you can, shrink as much as you can, but take up 100% of whatever available space is there. So as soon as we add flex wrap, they are going to take up all of the space there. Okay. Got it? All right. And then what we want to do is on the main and on the sidebar, we want main to basically take up a majority of the space that's there. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to make a rule on main, and we're going to apply a flex value of 2. Okay, so if I just put 2, what does that mean?
Grow.
Yeah, grow.
Yeah.
Okay, and then for the aside, we're going to say flex 1. Okay, so we're setting, and when we apply this, it's grow, but it also implies that flex shrink is set to 1 and flex basis is set to auto. But now if we refresh the page, you're going to see that the main takes up a majority of the space that's there. They're both allowed to grow. They're both allowed to shrink. but the aside is just never going to be as, as wide as the main. Like if we look in here and we look, the aside is 340, main is 608, right? So, I mean, it's not like, it's still taking up like a I mean, we're saying, hey, you're going to grow at twice the rate. If we want main to be a little bit bigger, we can set that to 3. And then it takes up a little bit more of the available space. So now it's, not like it's taking up a third. Well, I guess it kind of is. So if we look, I don't think it's, the math is quite right, but this is 294, main is 740. So, I mean, it's, we have padding and stuff like that. We have some other things that are affecting it, and the border as well, but it's now taking up more space. So they will grow and shrink however they can, but you can see how the header and the footer are taking up the entire width, all of the space that they can. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're just allowing these items to grow and shrink. And in the case of the header and the footer, we're saying, hey, you guys just take up 100%, take up all of the space that is there and, make that part of your layout. Make sense? You guys have questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
In main, in aside, if instead of using the flex 3 and flex 1, if you would have used basis, flex basis 75 for main, and then flex basis 25%, would that work too?
Sure. So now it's always going to be 3/4, and this is going to be 1/4 of the available space. So if we look at the sizes
and shrink, it would keep that percentage, right? That way.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
So it grows and shrinks, and then eventually it's going to drop. So the reason that it's like it can't fit. So this is as big as the aside has to be. It can't shrink any smaller because we put padding of 2 M's, which is holding it open. So the minimum size of it, and the fact that it says aside, that text plus the padding, the minimum size for the aside has to be 109 pixels, 109.66, it looks like. So at some point it could wrap because we're using flex wrap. Now, if we go back to our flex basis and we refresh, then they're going to sit, we won't have that issue now because you can see aside is bigger, you know what I mean? Like the aside doesn't get that small anymore. So you might have to play around with them. I mean, this would prevent that from happening, but I mean, up until that point, it works, and I mean, ultimately, once we learn how to make responsive web pages, we're never going to have something be this, like this wouldn't be, if I had content in here, it would kind of look silly, right? Because it's not wide enough. We would want these to stack on top of each other and take up 100%, just like the header and the footer. Okay. But that will involve us learning about media queries and some other things. We're not quite there yet. Coming soon. So. Okay. Yeah, definitely. All right. Do you guys have any questions about that? Okay, so looking at the same example, I am going to go ahead and I'm going to come into my HTML, and I'm going to, so I have main, and then I have aside, and then I'm going to make another aside, and we're just going to say, we're going to call this one aside 2. And let's give these classes. So this one can be A1 for aside 1, and this one can have a class of A2. Okay, so if I refresh my page, you can see like these are, you know, the page still works, right? Like all the CSS works, we just have 2 asides instead of 1 aside. Yeah? Everybody following me?
Yes.
Okay. So what we can do with Flex is this is another property that you can put on the items, on the Flex items, but we can not only control like how they grow, how they shrink, the size of the items, but we can also control the order of the items. And we can do that using the order property. So, you know, this is a common, and I mean, normally if we were building this, we might really want the page to look more like this, right? You don't have to change your page, but we probably would have like, maybe this would be navigation, this would be my main topic, and then this would be some, you know, advertisement or whatever it might be. But this would be a common layout that you would find on websites. Okay. Now, the problem is when we set up the HTML like this, if I'm a screen reader and I don't care about how the page looks, I read the page top down. So I come to the page, I read, you know, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to read all of this content first. And this might just be navigation. It might not be really that important, right? So as a screen reader, and maybe I have a bunch of navigation in the sidebar, it's going to go through, it's going to take time. It's going to read out all of that navigational information. And, you know, maybe I don't want it to read out all of that navigational information. So what I would probably want to do from an accessibility standpoint is the main probably contains the best information. That's the information that I really want my user to see. And let's just pretend, for the sake of argument, this aside has some sort of navigation. We'll just say aside navigation. And maybe this has like, you know, extra info or something. Okay. And so when the user sees it, we want them to see that navigation, we want them to see main, and then we want them to see the extra info. But from an accessibility standpoint, main is probably the most important information. If we're looking at this stuff, then the next important information is going to be the aside, right? And I mean, with the extra info, and then the next important would be the navigation. Okay. Right. Because like, yeah, it might be important for a screen reader, but like more than likely, you probably just want to know what the content is on the page. And then maybe this has some special extra information that's relevant to the page content, but you know, you might want to look at that next, and then you would, you know, maybe want to find out what the navigation is if you want to drill in farther. So if I write it like this, in the order that I want the screen reader to read it, it would be like this: main, aside extra info, and then aside navigation. So if we look at it on the page, it looks like main, aside extra info, aside navigation. For my visual users, I don't want it to look like this. I want aside navigation to be over here. Then I want main to be in the middle, and I want aside extra info to be over here on the right. So we can change the order using the order property. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to target and there's a couple of different ways that we could do this, but I'll just show you both ways. So if we target the A.A1, which is our first aside, that is the navigation aside, and I use my order and I tell it to have an order of 1. If we refresh on the page, you can see how, actually, sorry, this would have to have an order of -1. -1 is what I wanted. You can see how it actually makes it come first, right? So it goes above the header, okay? So that's not what we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to give the header. We don't have a rule for just header, so let's make one header. And if I use order of -1 on that, and we refresh, now the header comes first. They both have -1, but so when they both have the same order value, it defaults to the order that it shows up in the HTML. Okay, if that's confusing, you could just make this have an order of -2, like a higher, well, lower, I don't know, whatever that is, but increased negative value. That's going to do the same thing. So the header comes first, then the aside navigation, and then here's main, and here's the extra info. But you can see that we can reorder these elements. So negative numbers take them like kind of to the left and up. Positive numbers are going to take them down and, you know, and push them down. So like if I changed my header to have an order of, well, at this point, even if I just do 1, because nothing else has order on it, it's going to push it to the bottom of the page. Okay, but you can see how I can reorder how my page visually looks, which is pretty cool, right? We can push stuff around and move it. So ideally, I probably want this to be first, right? The header should be first. Then we should have this aside navigation, then main, then the aside extra info. But in the HTML, it still shows in the order that I want. I mean, maybe the header just has the name of the company. Maybe we don't even want that to be up there. Maybe we want that to be down here or something like that. Or maybe this actually in the HTML, it goes right here. I mean, you don't have to completely overthink this, but just to demonstrate this, if I organize it like that, right, I can still have it visually look like this. Okay, so now it's in the HTML for my screen reader. It's going to read main, aside extra info, header, aside navigation, footer. But visually on the page, it's going to appear like this. Okay, so I mean, you might not use this feature a ton, but it definitely can be helpful in some situations where you just need to kind of like, you know, you want to move stuff around. It will become more important with responsive page, because like it would be very common to have your responsive page if you were building this. I'm just going to do undo here for a second. Letting me undo, but you know, we would probably have our header, and then, I mean, maybe we have the main and then the aside, blah, blah, blah. But if I wanted to make this mobile and make it like, you know, I might want to reorganize everything, right? It's like on the mobile, maybe I want my navigation to be first or even second, and then I want main, and then I want the extra info, then I want the footer, or whatever. You can reorganize stuff around using the order property. You guys have any questions?
And that's dependent on the flex property, right? You have to have flex turned on.
Yes,
to use
yeah,
order?
it doesn't work without
Okay.
flex. Yep.
So Emily, does this take the place of a few weeks ago when we built tables out using HTML? Is this what we would use instead if we have to build a table?
I think it depends on the content. If it's tabular data, it should still be a table. But if you're trying to just build layout, then it should be flex or grid, which is coming. Okay. But you know, I've showed you guys a couple different ways that you could create navigation using an unordered list, because the unordered lists stack, right? We looked at how we could make them appear side by side using floats. We could do inline block. Those were all different examples. We could use flex too, real easily, right? And get all of our items to sit side by side. And it would be a really easy way. Like if we just create a navigation here, let's just make a nav element. Okay, so I'm going to make a nav. It's going to have a UL. It's going to have LI items. And let's just say they say link 1, 2, 3, whatever. Let's make 5 of them. I'm not going to put A tags in there. We'll just have the text show. Okay, so, you know, I have an unordered list. So obviously if I refresh, like here's my links, right? This is technically my navigation. Okay, so if I want this to display right underneath the header and take up the entire width, what do I need to do? What do you guys think?
Grow it to 100%.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically we want it to look just like the header and the footer. So we could just use this group selector, right? And include nav. Okay. Now, so here it is, right? It actually goes to the right spot because, no, sorry, it doesn't. We need to move it up above aside navigation. So aside navigation, which has the A1, we made that -1. So I need to make a rule for nav at this point. We'll just throw a nav in here. And we're going to say order. And the order for this should be, if we did -1, it should override the aside A1 because it comes first in the HTML. So header, here's our navigation, here's the aside navigation main, right? You guys following me? Hello?
We are here.
Okay. Okay, and then if I want these links, I mean, they aren't links, but let's just pretend they are. If I want these to sit side by side, right? How can I do that with Flex? What do you guys think we need to do?
Would it go on the UL?
Set up the column. The row.
Okay, so I think it was Trish. What did you say about the UL?
Would it go on the UL, the flex
Yep.
property?
Yeah, because that needs to now be a Flex container. These guys need to be Flex items. So we could target nav UL, and we're going to say display Flex. While we're at it, let's just remove the bullets. So list style type none. Okay, so that makes them sit side by side. And then I don't want them to look just like this. I want them to kind of be spread out. I could use my display what on Flex to spread them out horizontally across the navigation. What's the property we could use to affect a position of them along the main axes?
Just
justify content.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so if we use justify content. And if we set it to like, something like whatever, space around, space between, space evenly, I mean, you can play around with that however you want them to look. But if we do something like that, they're nicely separated, equally spaced, right? And then we can kind of set this up to be the way that we want, right? So there they are right there, right? If we do space between, they go all the way to the edges. That looks okay here, but if my page gets really big, they probably get too far spaced out. So I think probably space around is a better solution. But you can definitely kind of play around and figure out what it is. But then, we have like pretty much just like a website, right? Do you guys have questions? Okay, so, you know, I have a bunch of, some of the stuff we talked about. There's some other things that we didn't talk about. I have some examples of some stuff that you guys can look through. So, go through this material. There's a lot of information on the book in regards to flex.
Emily,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, quick question.
Yeah.
So can we use the flex direction row?
On what?
Before justify the content?
You want to use flex grow?
Yeah. Can we use the flex
Yeah,
direction or flex?
what do we want them to grow to though?
No, flex direction row.
Oh, flex direction. Yeah, you could, but it's like that is the default flex direction. So we don't really need to. We could put it on there, but they're already displaying in a row. So this is the default behavior.
Okay, so we don't need to put it.
Yeah, you could put it on there, but it's not, if it's helpful to you, like put it on there, but eventually you probably won't use it if you want them to display in a row, because that's how they display by default.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you, Dominic.
Sure. Okay, so in regards to, this week, obviously go through the material. It will just help you guys to review it, to go through everything. You guys do have you have an assignment that's due, and you guys have, there's an extra credit assignment as well. So if you guys go did we talk about this? I think maybe I mentioned it. There's like some flex games that you can play that are helpful. They'll just help you to learn more about flex. You guys have an assignment to build this. Well, I made a video about it. I think I started to show you. But you guys have to build something that's similar to similar to what I have here. And pretty much we're concentrating on the navigation and this like header. Both of these things are using flex, and you guys need to make something that's similar to this. So I have a whole little video. It's a couple minutes long that just explain, what I want you guys to do. Obviously, read through this. I give you guys, you're going to use your own images, make sure your code's valid, all that good stuff. This is due on the 14th. You guys also have the optional extra credit, although I would encourage you guys to play the games. There's 2 things that you can play: Flexbox Froggy, Flexbox Defense. They'll just help you to learn more about Flexbox. So I would go through all the material first and then try to play the games. And when you're done, you're just going to upload a screenshot of the final screen of each game to show that you played the entire games, and you can earn up to 10 points of extra credit if you play both games. And so that's for 641. In 642, you guys have
It would be 643 now.
Oh,
right?
sorry. Yes, it would be 643.
Okay.
You're right. Sorry. Okay, so in 643, if you guys go to 643, there is I don't know why that stuff is showing. Oh shoot. Let me just fix this really fast. So sorry. Oh, that's weird. Okay, sorry. Okay, so in 643, there's some information. Your new deliverable, which is due on the 16th, is to do your sitemap and a competitive analysis. So these are just things for you guys to read in regards to what a sitemap is, what a competitive analysis is. The sitemap is basically where you're going to turn your card sorting results into more of a visual representation. So you need to show me the hierarchy of how your website is going to look. You guys can pretty easily create this in XD. I mean, even if you just did something like made some boxes and put your text in it. Let me just so if this was my home, here's my home page, and then these would just be my sub pages of my website right here. So, you know, maybe I have like about, this might be our services or whatever it is. So you guys are gonna make, this is like the top tier navigation, right? Get help or whatever it is. And then you're gonna make the sub pages appear underneath them. So this might be something like, you know, team, this is history or whatever it is. You know, our services are like, you know, whatever we offer, you know, service one. And maybe service one has like, you know, it has some sub pages, but you basically are going to come up with a representation. And when you make a sitemap, you connect everything together like to show the hierarchy. So you have to like kind of draw some lines. You can use the line tool. And if these are all, oops. You're gonna, once you could draw your lines first, or you could draw them later and then just use object, arrange, send to back. If you guys want to make this in Illustrator, if you want to make it in Photoshop, if you want to make it in some other application, doesn't really matter. It just needs to, you know, show the hierarchy of how all the pages relate together. Does this make sense to you guys? Okay, yes. So that's the sitemap. The other part of the assignment is to do a competitive analysis. And the competitive analysis, this talks about competitive analysis. Here's some ideas of things you can compare. You don't have to use these categories. Let me just download my file that I have. I gave you guys like an Excel file. I know Leslie loves Excel files, so I don't want her to go a day without one. Your love for Excel files.
There's no pictures.
Well, this one will have a picture if that makes you feel better. So if you guys don't have Excel, you know, you can open this in like the Google spreadsheet, just open the file. So this is a starting point for your competitive analysis. Read through the material that I provided so you guys understand it a little bit better. And of course, we can chat about this on Monday, but I would encourage you guys to get started. So what you need to do is you need to come up with your criteria that you're going to compare your company with the competitors. Okay. And so like, I just put these things in here. You can change these categories. If you guys are doing like a website for a restaurant, you might have different categories, right? Like ease of use, making reservations, like, you know, can I place an order online? I mean, those might be more important things for restaurants, right? They don't have to be super granular, but definitely think of the key like features that you want to have on your website and kind of, you know, compare those things. So here, you're just gonna, like, I asked you guys to make a screen grab. So you want to put a screen grab of your site, you want to put a screen grab of your competitors, add the URL, the company profile. This is like the elevator pitch of the company. So who is the company? What do they do? You're just gonna write, you know, what you think that is. What's the key competitive advantage? You know, these are the ones that I came up with. Again, you guys don't have to use these categories. make your own categories. I have other criteria. So come up with your own criteria if you need to. And what I would recommend is that what I want you guys to do is everybody in the group pick a competitor. So if you're in a 3-person group, you're going to have 3 competitors. If you're in a 4-person group, you're going to have 4 competitors. Okay. And everybody's going to analyze one of their competitors based on the criteria that you as a group come up with. So you guys should all be using the same criteria. And when you turn this in, you're turning in one file to me with everybody's information together. So if you guys want to work on this independently, that's fine, but you will need to combine it into one file when you submit this assignment. So you're just going to, one person from your group is going to submit this assignment. They're going to give me the sitemap and the competitive analysis, whoever is the submitter for your group for this project. And yeah, so read through this stuff. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I don't anticipate that this should be super hard. I mean, the sitemap is pretty much done. You just have to translate that information into a visual diagram. And then the competitive analysis, if you guys just, kind of divide and conquer, you should be able to get this done. You will have a little bit of time together on Monday. I can promise you guys like at least an hour and a half to work on this. So, you can work together if you need to. And obviously, if you have any questions, because you have those other assignments that are due Sunday night, this isn't due until Tuesday night. You might want to tackle those first, and then you'll have a little bit of time on Monday to work on this, and then I can address any questions that you might have. But I would advise you guys to maybe think about it, maybe come up with your criteria. I mean, you could certainly start working on this independently if you wanted to, but that's what I have for you. Do you have any questions before I let you go?
I have a question, but it's my group specific.
Okay, let's just see if there's any other questions, and if there aren't, then we can chat about that. Anybody else? All right, well, you guys have a wonderful rest of your week. Happy Veterans Day tomorrow, if any of you are veterans. Thank you. And I will see you guys Monday, right?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
Okay. I'm gonna stop sharing and stop recording, and then we can talk.